Good evening. Tonight we're drifting back through thousands of years of human history to explore something every single one of us has done at some point, standing in front of a mirror, wondering how to look just a little bit better before we face the world. Not the influencer version, with ring lights and 12-step routines. The original version. The ground-up minerals rubbed into skin. The lead paste that quietly ate away at people's faces while they smiled through dinner parties. The eye drops made from a poisonous berry, used simply to make someone's gaze look a touch more romantic across a candle-lit room. Before we start, thank you to everyone who requested this topic in the comments. I read every one of them, and tonight's journey exists because you asked for it. If you find these long, slow walks through history relaxing, feel free to subscribe, though only if it genuinely helps you unwind. And a small note, this channel is now available on Spotify too, so if you'd rather just listen with your eyes closed, you'll find the link below. Now turn the lights down low, let a fan hum quietly in the background, get yourself comfortable under the blankets, and let your whole body go heavy and still. Before we begin properly, ask yourself something. Did people in the ancient world actually look in a mirror and feel proud of what they saw? Did anyone genuinely believe that beetle shell powder was a good look? How did entire civilizations decide collectively that a certain shade of pale skin or a certain shape of eyebrow was the peak of human attractiveness? And could you survive even one single morning of an ancient beauty routine without fainting, losing a tooth, or going quietly blind? You're about to find out. You've just opened your eyes at the very beginning of human history, in a world with no glass mirrors, no soap, and absolutely no concept of what a moisturizer is supposed to do. All you have is what the land gives you. Let's begin. The first phase: paint. Long before anyone could write a single word, a person somewhere crouched by a riverbank picked up a handful of reddish clay and pressed it against their own cheek. And somehow, that small act became the root of everything that follows tonight. You are standing in that same distant morning now, in an age with no words for beauty, only instinct. Your palette is simple because simple is all that exists. Red ochre, an iron-rich earth pigment, is your most prized possession. Archaeologists have found traces of it at burial sites and living sites on nearly every continent, ground down with stone tools and blended with animal fat into a workable paste. You smear it across your face, rub it into your hair, and press it onto the bodies of those who have died, because this color carries weight far beyond decoration. Charred wood gives you black. Certain berries and roots offer a dull yellow or a bruised violet if you're patient enough to extract it. Your entire cosmetics collection fits inside a hollowed-out bone. There are no brushes. You use fingertips, chewed twigs, or a flattened splinter of wood. There is certainly no mirror, unless a still, windless pond counts, which means most of your beauty look is actually a joint effort between you and whoever is willing to help. Your sibling paints one side of your face, you return the favor, and neither of you says anything about the parts that don't quite line up. Imagine trusting the person next to you, who has never once told you the truth about anything, to draw a straight line near your eye using a stick. That is the actual state of affairs, every single time you paint your face in this era. But this was never simply about looking pleasant. The ochre on your skin tells everyone around you who you belong to, what ceremony is beginning, whether a hunt is about to start, or whether someone in your group has just died. A painted face speaks before your mouth ever opens, which matters enormously in a world where language itself is still being invented. In many ways, this is the very first form of communication humans developed beyond speech, written not on stone or parchment, but directly onto skin. And none of it lasts, of course. There is no product on Earth in this era that can survive a rainstorm or a swim across a river, so you simply reapply again and again for your entire short life. It's an exhausting kind of beauty regime, constant upkeep for a look that vanishes within hours. And yet, standing here, coated in dirt and grease, squinting at your own blurred reflection in a puddle, you should feel something like pride. You are witnessing the birth of a habit that humanity will never fully abandon, not for the next 40,000 years. Egypt and the sacred Black Line. The scene shifts now. You're standing on the banks of the Nile, and you're about to line your eyes with a paste made from crushed lead ore. Don't be alarmed. Everyone here does this, from the servants sweeping the temple floors to the pharaoh himself. This look, in fact, may be the single most recognizable beauty style in the entirety of human history. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where Kohl is not simply cosmetic. It is religious, protective, and fashionable all at once. That heavy black ring around your eyes is believed to honor the gods, shield your eyes from the punishing desert glare, and possibly ward off the flies and infections that plague life along the river. It also, undeniably, looks stunning, and the Egyptians were entirely aware of that fact. Your Kohl comes primarily from two sources. Galena, a dark gray lead-based mineral, produces that deep, dramatic black. Malachite, a green copper ore, gives you a shimmering emerald tone for the lid. You grind these on a small stone pallet, blend them with a touch of water, oil, or fat, and store the finished product in a small carved pot or hollow reed tube. Some of these containers are so elaborately crafted that they're buried alongside their owners, because in Egypt, looking your best in the afterlife is treated as a serious, practical concern. You're not just packing food and jewelry for eternity. You're packing your eyeliner. Applying it is a genuine skill, and it's expected of nearly everyone regardless of status. Using a thin stick of wood, bone, or bronze, you dip into the paste and trace a bold line around each eye, often sweeping it outward and upward toward the temple in that unmistakable elongated shape you'd instantly recognize today. Men wear it. Women wear it. Children wear it. The wealthy use the finest, most delicately ground pigments, while laborers use a coarser version, but almost nobody goes without it entirely. Try to picture an entire society that unanimously agreed, for thousands of consecutive years, that dramatic winged eyeliner was simply not optional. Here's the surprising part. This ancient habit may have actually done something useful. Modern researchers studying the chemistry of Egyptian kohl have suggested the dark pigment may have helped reduce the glare of the blinding desert sun, in a way that isn't entirely unlike the black stripes some modern athletes wear beneath their eyes. Some have also theorized it may have offered mild protection against certain eye infections common in a hot, dusty, insect-heavy environment. So while the primary motivation was almost certainly aesthetic and spiritual, there may have been an accidental health benefit tucked inside. One of the rare moments in tonight's story where an ancient beauty ritual might not have been quietly working against the people who practiced it. Notice the word might, because the base of that gleaming black kohl was, once again, a lead compound, and lead has never been kind to the human body. The daily exposure here was relatively small, and some researchers speculate the body may have developed certain defenses against it over a lifetime of gradual exposure. But make no mistake, an entire civilization was decorating its eyes with heavy metal from early childhood until the day they died. This is a theme you should get comfortable with tonight, because it will reappear again and again as we move through history. Still standing here with your eyes rimmed in glittering black and touches of green, catching the golden Nile light, you look genuinely remarkable, and on some level you know it. The Egyptians took a piece of ground stone and turned it into something sacred, protective, and endlessly stylish, all at the same time. Not bad for a look drawn on with a twig. The Egyptian skincare cabinet. Now that your eyes are done, it's time to move on to the rest of your skin. And Egyptian skincare, it turns out, was far more advanced than you might expect, and considerably more unsettling than you might hope. You coat yourself generously in oils and animal fats to fight off the merciless desert sun, because out here, moisturizing isn't a luxury reserved for special occasions. It's a matter of basic survival. The climate along the Nile is a full-time assault on human skin, dry heat by day, sharp cold by night, and wind that never quite stops. Keeping your skin oiled isn't indulgence. It's maintenance, the same way you might maintain a boat or a roof. You reach first for castor oil, pressed from the seeds of a plant that grows easily along the riverbanks. You also use moringa oil, prized for its lightness and its pleasant, faintly sweet scent, and various rendered animal fats when plant oils are scarce. This matters so much to Egyptian daily life that laborers working on major construction projects, the pyramids, the temples, the endless irrigation canals, were sometimes given rations of oil as part of their payment. Think about that for a moment. Skin care wasn't treated as vanity. It was treated as compensation, as essential as the bread and beer that made up the rest of a worker's wages. Try explaining that arrangement to an employer today. Honey earns its place next to you, and it genuinely deserves the reputation it carries across nearly every ancient civilization we'll visit tonight. It softens skin, seals in moisture, and carries natural properties that help prevent small cuts and blemishes from turning into something worse. Mixed with milk, it becomes a soothing paste that wouldn't look entirely out of place in an expensive modern spa, just with several thousand fewer years of refinement behind it. For exfoliation, you scrub your skin with finely ground alabaster, sometimes combined with a pinch of natron, the same salty mineral compound used in the process of mummification, to dry out and preserve the bodies of the dead. Yes, your gentle morning scrub shares an ingredient with an embalming table. In Egypt, it seems, every beauty ritual eventually finds its way back to thoughts of the afterlife. You're also chasing something else, a pale, smooth, even complexion, a theme that will follow you through nearly every culture we visit tonight, on every continent, in every century. Egyptian recipes for skin brighteners and pastes promising to smooth away spots and unify skin tone appear again and again in the surviving records. And the fight against visible aging was every bit as real here as it is now. Surviving medical papyri, ancient scrolls of practical and medical knowledge, include recipes explicitly described as treatments to smooth wrinkles and restore a more youthful appearance to the face. The dream that the right ointment might somehow reverse the passage of time is not a modern invention dreamed up by a cosmetics company. Someone was already chasing that exact dream on the banks of the Nile, while the pyramids were still relatively new structures on the horizon. But we do have to address the ingredients you'd probably rather not think about too closely. Some surviving Egyptian medical and cosmetic texts include recipes that called for animal waste as an ingredient, used in treatments for various skin conditions. In a world without laboratories or controlled experiments, people tried everything available to them, including substances gathered from livestock pens. Whether these particular concoctions actually helped, did nothing, or simply smelled unbearable is something we'll likely never know for certain. But it's a useful reminder that for most of human history, skincare was pure trial and error, and the errors could be spectacularly unpleasant. The larger point here is that Egyptian skincare wasn't vanity for its own sake. In a demanding, sun-scorched land, tending to your skin was practical, medical, and spiritual, all bound together. It was tied to health, to social standing, and to the eternal life every Egyptian was quietly preparing for across their entire lifetime. In places, it was genuinely ahead of its time, sophisticated formulations built on real working knowledge of what softened skin and what helped it heal. And in other places, it was, quite literally, scraped up from behind a goat. That contradiction, more than anything else, captures the strange and enduring spirit of the whole ancient beauty project. People wanted to look flawless forever, and they were willing to try almost anything, however it smelled, to get a little closer to that goal. Cleopatra, the first true beauty icon. Every era eventually produces its defining beauty icon, and Egypt gave the ancient world its first true superstar. You've likely heard fragments of the legend already: the milk baths, the lips stained deep red, the eyes lined in glittering black and green. Whether every detail passed down through history is strictly accurate hardly matters anymore, because her reputation has outlasted her entire empire by roughly 2,000 years. What is clear is that she understood something modern marketing wouldn't fully articulate for centuries afterward, that beauty, presented correctly, is theater, and that a carefully managed public image can be more powerful than any army she could have raised. Let's start with the most famous story of all, the donkey milk baths. According to legend, Cleopatra bathed regularly in the milk of hundreds of donkeys, believing the mild acids would soften and brighten her skin. Whether she genuinely did this as a daily ritual is impossible to confirm, but the underlying science isn't nonsense. The lactic acid naturally present in milk really can gently exfoliate and soften skin, meaning the legend, however exaggerated it may have become in the retelling, is built on a real foundation. And consider, too, the sheer extravagance of the gesture. Commanding that much milk purely to soak in it is a display of wealth and status so audacious that it still echoes through history over 2 millennia later. That, in many ways, was always the actual point. The bath itself was never really about skin condition. It was about the story it told. Then there was her face. Ancient sources suggest the red used on her lips may have come from crushed insects combined with mineral pigments like red ochre, ground down into a rich, bold stain. Her eyes, naturally, would have received the full Egyptian treatment, deep black kohl paired with shimmering green malachite, extended outward into that same unmistakable dramatic shape worn across the kingdom. She would have used the same oils, honeys, and scented ointments as any Egyptian woman of her time, only the very finest versions, the kind that only immense wealth and royal power could provide. There was, in truth, nothing on her face that an ordinary Egyptian woman didn't also have access to in some form. She simply applied all of it with the confidence of an empire behind her. But here is the detail that made Cleopatra a legend, rather than simply a well-dressed queen. By most surviving accounts, it wasn't flawless physical features that made her so unforgettable. Ancient writers who described her tend to emphasize her sharp wit, her command of multiple languages, her extraordinary voice, and her overwhelming presence in a room, far more than any particular feature of her face. She understood with remarkable precision exactly how to present herself, how to dazzle a visiting Roman general, how to command her own court, how to stage an entrance that people would still be talking about generations later. Her beauty was, in the truest sense, a performance, carefully constructed from the perfumed sails of her ships to the golden throne she was carried in. She wasn't simply presenting a face. She was presenting an entire experience, and the world kept buying tickets. This is precisely what makes her the true birthplace of the beauty icon as a concept. Cleopatra grasped, centuries before anyone had a word for it, that image itself is a tool of political power, that how a person chooses to appear can genuinely shift the course of history, and that a legend, once it takes hold, grows far beyond whatever truth first sparked it. The stories surrounding her multiplied and glittered and spread precisely because she constructed them so skillfully in the first place. Even now, roughly 20 centuries later, her name still instantly conjures beauty, mystery, and seduction, a return on investment no modern brand could ever hope to replicate. So picture her now, draped in gold, her eyes rimmed in black, her lips stained deep red, reclining in a hall lit by hundreds of oil lamps. You are not simply looking at an ancient skincare routine. You are looking at the precise moment beauty transformed into something else entirely, a story that people tell about a person, long after the person herself is gone. A myth stitched together from milk, ochre, and sheer, undeniable force of personality. Cleopatra proved, once and for all, that the most powerful cosmetic in the ancient world was a well-told legend, and she wore hers better than anyone who came before her or after. Ancient Greece, pale skin, painted faces, and the unibrow ideal. The scene shifts again, and the warm golden sands of Egypt give way to marble columns and olive groves. You've arrived in ancient Greece, somewhere between the height of Athens' influence and the flourishing of its city-states, where beauty standards have taken a very different, and in some ways much stranger, turn. Here, pale skin is everything, not simply preferred, practically worshipped. A woman with fair, untouched skin was seen as someone who lived a life of leisure, someone who never needed to labor beneath the harsh Mediterranean sun. Tanned, weathered skin, by contrast, marked you instantly as a laborer, a field worker, someone whose life required physical toil outdoors. Your skin in this world is a walking advertisement for your social class, whether you like it or not. So how do you achieve this prized pallor? You reach for a substance called Simithian white lead. Ground lead carbonate, mixed with water or vinegar into a thick paste, then applied across the face, neck, and chest to create that coveted porcelain white finish. It's chalky, it's heavy, and it cracks slightly if you smile too widely, but none of that matters because the effect from a distance in flattering lamplight is striking. Wealthy women and the hetarai, the educated courtesans of Greek society who were expected to be cultured, witty, and visually captivating, use it liberally. It becomes, in many ways, the ancient world's first true foundation, the direct ancestor of every powder and liquid base sitting in a modern makeup bag today. And once again, we arrive at the same grim undertone running beneath so much of ancient beauty. Lead is quietly, patiently toxic. Prolonged exposure causes headaches, digestive problems, muscle weakness, and in severe cases, damage to the nervous system and the brain itself. Some historians have speculated, though this remains genuinely debated among scholars rather than settled fact, that widespread use of lead-based cosmetics may have contributed to health problems and even premature deaths among Greek women who used it heavily and consistently over many years. Nobody in this era understood the mechanism, of course. They simply saw pale skin as beautiful, chased it with whatever worked, and paid whatever price came due later, often without ever connecting the two. Beneath that white base, you add a touch of color, crushed mulberries, red ochre, or a plant-based dye applied to cheeks and lips, adding warmth against all that stark, chalky pallor. Some women line their eyes with soot or a form of kohl, not entirely unlike the Egyptian version, though generally applied with a lighter, more restrained hand than what you'd find along the Nile. Now here is where Greek beauty standards take a genuinely surprising turn: the eyebrows. Full, dark, thick eyebrows were considered highly desirable in ancient Greece. And not simply full, many Greeks specifically favored eyebrows that met in the middle, forming a single unbroken line across the forehead. Yes, the unibrow, a look most modern beauty routines are built entirely around eliminating, was once an actively sought-after trend among fashionable women. If nature didn't provide this feature on its own, women simply took matters into their own hands. Using a dark pigment, often made from soot, antimony, or crushed dark minerals, they would extend and darken their eyebrows until the two sides connected seamlessly across the bridge of the nose. In some cases, women even attached false hair, sometimes made from goat hair, to bridge the gap and complete the desired look. Consider that for a moment, an entire beauty industry, however small in scale by modern standards, built around gluing extra hair onto your forehead to look more attractive. What we chase as beautiful has never been fixed. It has always been entirely a matter of time, place, and the particular culture surrounding it. Greek women also placed enormous importance on hair itself, and blonde hair, curiously, held a special place of desirability, associated with the goddesses and heroines described in mythology and epic poetry. Naturally dark-haired women sometimes lightened their hair using a mixture of vinegar and saffron, or by sitting for extended periods under the direct sun, wearing specially designed wide-brimmed hats with the crown cut away, allowing sunlight to bleach only the hair while shielding the delicate skin of the face. Imagine sitting motionless in a garden for hours, cooking your own hair beneath a brimless hat, purely in pursuit of a shade you weren't naturally born with. The lengths people go to for beauty rarely change. Only the specific methods do. Bathing, too, carried real cultural weight in Greek life. Public bathhouses served both practical and deeply social functions, and scented oils were used generously afterward, infused with rose, myrrh, or thyme, applied to keep skin soft and lightly perfumed throughout the day. Wealthier households sometimes maintained elaborate collections of these fragranced oils, each blend associated with a particular use, a particular time of day, or a particular occasion. Now close your eyes and picture a Greek noblewoman fully prepared for an evening banquet, her face coated in that same pale, faintly cracking white lead paste, her cheeks touched with soft color, her eyebrows darkened and deliberately extended into one continuous line, her hair lightened by seasons spent carefully baking beneath the sun. By her own culture's standards, in that particular moment in history, she is the very picture of beauty. And by nearly every standard held today, she would be considered almost entirely unrecognizable as such. That, more than any single fact we'll cover tonight, is the real lesson tucked inside this ancient world of powders and pastes. What earns admiration, what draws every eye in a crowded room, has never been permanent. It merely feels that way to whoever happens to be looking at any given moment in time. Ancient Rome, baths, blood, and the business of beauty. The scene shifts once more, and you find yourself carried westward, into the heart of an empire built on roads, aqueducts, and an absolutely relentless devotion to personal grooming. Welcome to ancient Rome, where beauty is not a private matter conducted quietly behind closed doors. It is a full-blown public event, performed daily in front of half the city. Let's begin at the baths, because in Rome, this is where beauty truly happens. The Roman bathhouse, the thermae, is one of the great engineering achievements of the ancient world, and also one of its great social institutions. You move through a careful sequence of rooms. The tepidarium, a warm chamber meant to ease you gently into the process. The caldarium, a hot room designed to open the pores and induce a proper sweat. And finally the frigidarium, a shockingly cold plunge meant to close everything back up and leave you invigorated. This isn't a quick rinse before dinner. It's an unhurried ritual that can consume the better part of an afternoon, and that's entirely by design. The baths are where business deals are struck, where gossip travels fastest, where friendships are maintained, and where being seen clean, oiled, and well cared for signals that you are a proper, respectable member of Roman society. Skipping the baths regularly doesn't just mean you're a little grubby. It marks you as someone with something to hide or something wrong. Since soap in the modern sense doesn't really exist yet, Roman bathing works rather differently than you'd expect. You coat your skin in olive oil, let it work into the grime and sweat built up over the day, and then an attendant, or you, if you're skilled enough, scrapes it all away using a curved metal tool called a strigil. Dragged firmly across the skin in long strokes, it lifts away the oily mixture of dirt, sweat, and dead skin in one continuous, thoroughly unglamorous motion. It actually works remarkably well, leaving skin clean and smooth. But imagine explaining this process to a friend today. You don't wash with water and soap. You oil yourself thoroughly and then get scraped clean, like a pan after cooking. It's effective, it's ancient, and it's a great deal more involved than a modern morning shower. Hair removal is another serious Roman preoccupation, pursued by both men and women with real dedication. Tweezing, shaving, and various depilatory pastes made from ingredients like arsenic, quicklime, and starch were all employed in the endless pursuit of smooth, hairless skin. At the baths, specialists known as alipilara handled the more tedious plucking work for those wealthy enough to afford it, working through underarms and other areas with tweezers, one hair at a time. If you've ever winced through a modern waxing appointment, take some comfort in knowing that Roman citizens were enduring nearly identical discomfort at public bathhouses 2,000 years ago, likely while catching up on the latest political scandal at the very same time. After the scraping and the plucking comes the more enjoyable portion of the ritual, the oils and perfumes. Freshly cleaned, you're anointed with scented oils that leave your skin soft, fragrant, and faintly gleaming in the light. Wealthy Romans have access to imported perfumes from across the empire, and smelling expensive becomes its own quiet symbol of status. You leave the baths not merely clean, but transformed, polished from head to toe, wrapped in a cloud of fragrance, ready to be seen and admired by the rest of the city. Now let's step inside a wealthy Roman woman's cosmetics collection, because it reads less like a modern makeup bag and more like a small, alarming chemistry set. The foundation of it all, once again, is white lead, the very same fashionable poison the Greeks embraced before them. Ground fine and mixed into a paste, it creates that pale, even complexion that continues to signal wealth and leisure across yet another civilization. Over this base goes a light dusting of chalk powder for extra smoothness. For color, cheeks are brightened using red ochre, various plant-based dyes, or, in riskier corners of the market, red lead, trading a healthy-looking flush for a slow, cumulative dose of poison. The eyes receive careful attention too. Dark pigments made from soot and ash line and define them, while crushed minerals add depth and color to the lids. Saffron, the same precious spice worth its weight in silver, is sometimes used to add a golden tint to the eyelids of the truly wealthy, because if you can afford it, why not paint your face with something that costs more than most people's yearly wages? Building this entire look is slow, painstaking work, which is precisely why wealthy Roman women rarely did it themselves. Instead, they relied on enslaved women trained specifically as cosmetics, skilled beauty specialists who understood the recipes, the ratios, and the techniques required to assemble the complete look each morning. A skilled cosmeta was genuinely valued for her expertise, though the position came with real risk. A clumsy application or an unflattering result could provoke serious anger from a demanding mistress, and Roman writers of the period describe tempers running dangerously hot in these private mourning rituals. Roman satirists absolutely feasted on this entire culture of elaborate feminine preparation. Poets mocked the sheer effort poured into a woman's appearance, joking that her true face lay hidden somewhere beneath layer upon layer of paint, and that a husband might genuinely never see his wife's real, unadorned features. It was often unkind commentary, and it conveniently ignored the fact that Roman men groomed themselves plenty as well. But it does prove one enduring truth. The complaint that people wear too much makeup is nearly as old as makeup itself. There's a real sadness threaded through all the satire, though, because that white lead and red lead genuinely were causing lasting damage. Years of daily application slowly took their toll on the skin and the body, and the very products meant to create an illusion of youthful beauty were quietly working against it, driving women to apply even more of the same substance to conceal the harm it had already caused. It's the same tragic cycle we saw beginning in Greece, now playing out on an even grander imperial scale. Rome built roads that still exist today, aqueducts that carried water for hundreds of miles, and one of the most sophisticated civilizations the ancient world had ever seen. And its people still couldn't resist smearing toxic metals onto their faces in pursuit of a smoother complexion. Which brings us naturally to Roman hair, where the ambition and the sheer disregard for personal risk only climbs higher still. Elaborate, towering hairstyles required hours of dedicated labor, an entire team of enslaved hairdressers, and quite often a substantial quantity of hair that didn't originally belong to the woman wearing it. Blonde hair was especially prized among fashionable Roman women, so much so that the golden and reddish hair of conquered peoples from Rome's northern territories was harvested and shipped south, woven into elaborate wigs for the Roman elite. Meanwhile, women who preferred to lighten or dye their own natural hair used mixtures so harsh and corrosive that repeated use could leave hair damaged, brittle, or falling out entirely, sometimes sending the very same woman running back toward the wig makers she'd originally hoped to avoid. The architecture of these hairstyles could be genuinely astonishing. towering constructions of tightly wound curls stacked high above the forehead, elaborate braided patterns coiled and pinned into intricate designs that seemed to have required a small team and considerable patience to construct properly. These looks shifted with changing fashions, and the elite followed trends set by empresses and other prominent women, much the way people centuries later would follow the lead of royalty or film stars. Achieving these looks meant hours spent with an ornatrix, an enslaved woman specifically trained in the demanding, skilled art of hairdressing. She worked with heated curling rods, fine needles and pins, and years of practiced skill to construct these towering, elaborate styles. It was genuinely valued, skilled labor, and also frequently dangerous, since a botched style or an accidental burn from a heated rod could bring real, sometimes brutal punishment down upon the woman responsible. Roman writings describe furious mistresses lashing out over an imperfect curl, painting a genuinely grim picture of what a single bad hair day could mean when the person styling your hair was someone you legally owned as property. Beneath all the glamour and elaborate spectacle sat the hard, uncomfortable truth that so much of Roman beauty rested directly on the forced labor of the unfree. So pause here and picture the complete scene. A wealthy Roman woman prepared for an evening banquet, her face pale with white lead, her cheeks touched with red ochre or risky red lead, her eyes rimmed in dark ash and shimmering with a hint of costly saffron, her hair piled impossibly high above her head in curls that took hours and another human being's forced labor to construct. She is, by every standard of her own time and place, magnificent. She is also, by any modern medical standard, slowly poisoning herself one careful layer at a time, while an enslaved woman kneels behind her, tending to a tower of hair that could catch fire from a single stray candle flame. That was Rome, beauty as public spectacle, beauty as status, and beauty built, quite literally, on the backs of people who had no choice in the matter at all. Ancient China, the art of restraint. The scene shifts eastward now, far from the marble baths of Rome, into a civilization built on an entirely different philosophy of beauty, one rooted in subtlety, precision, and centuries of careful, unhurried ritual. You've arrived in ancient China, somewhere across the long span of its imperial dynasties, where the ideal face is smooth, pale, and deliberately understated, achieved not through corrosive metals but through something remarkably gentler, finely milled rice powder. Let's begin with that famous pale complexion, because fair skin is prized here too, just as it has been in nearly every civilization you've visited so far tonight, and for largely the same underlying reason. Pale, untouched skin signals a life spent indoors, away from the fields, away from manual labor beneath an unforgiving sun. It marks you, instantly and silently, as a woman of standing and comfort. To achieve this look, fashionable women turn to rice powder, ground exceptionally fine, and dusted evenly across the face for a soft, smooth, matte finish that catches candlelight beautifully. Now, it must be said honestly, lead-based powders did make their way into Chinese cosmetics as well, across various periods and dynasties, so this was not always a perfectly gentle affair. But the enduring image most associated with Chinese beauty culture, that soft rice powder finish, does give it a somewhat gentler reputation compared to the outright chemical warfare happening elsewhere across the ancient world. And that reputation isn't entirely undeserved, even if it wasn't universally true. The lips are where real artistry enters the picture. Rather than coating the entire mouth evenly, as you might expect, women in various Chinese dynasties often applied red pigment, typically derived from cinnabar or safflower, in small, deliberate shapes. A tiny, precise dot or petal of color at the center of the lips, making the mouth appear delicate, refined, almost like a small painted flower. Fashions in lip shape shifted considerably across the centuries and dynasties, sometimes fuller and rounder, sometimes reduced to little more than a small red bud at the mouth center, and following the current style marked a woman as someone genuinely in tune with elegant, fashionable taste. This wasn't really about coverage at all. It was about composing a tiny, deliberate work of art on your own face, recreated fresh each and every morning. Eyebrows received equally devoted attention. Women plucked and carefully shaped their natural brows, then redrew them using dark pigment into whatever form current fashion favored most, and these forms shifted dramatically across different eras and dynasties. Some periods favored long, willowy, gently curving brows. Others preferred shorter, more angular, distinctive shapes. The well-dressed, fashion-conscious woman kept close pace with whatever style currently held favor. In certain eras, foreheads were even lightly decorated with small painted or applied ornaments placed delicately between the brows, a final graceful touch. The overall effect aimed for was harmony and composure. A face arranged with the same careful, deliberate attention one might bring to composing a poem or painting a landscape scroll. Then there were the fingernails, perhaps the single most eloquent status symbol in the entire Chinese beauty tradition. Among elite women, extremely long fingernails signaled, unmistakably, that the wearer performed absolutely no physical labor of any kind, because obviously, hands like these could never be put to practical use. And that was precisely the intended message. These prized, fragile nails were often protected using ornate nail guards crafted from gold or other fine materials, turning the very impracticality of the look into a deliberate, glittering display of wealth and leisure. It's a beautiful, entirely impractical statement, a way of announcing, without a single spoken word, that your hands existed purely to be admired rather than ever put to use. Few status symbols across the whole of human history have been quite so pointedly useless, which is precisely what made them so remarkably effective. What ties all of this together, more than any single technique or ingredient, is restraint. Chinese beauty, at its cultural ideal, prized subtlety, precision, and quiet refinement over bold, dramatic spectacle, treating the face as something to be perfected with a controlled, deliberate hand rather than transformed through excess. It was beauty framed as discipline, as taste, as a visible reflection of social harmony and personal cultivation, rather than raw, attention-seeking display. Every element, the pale powder, the small painted lips, the carefully shaped brows, the elaborately guarded nails, spoke the exact same elegant, restrained language of class and quiet self-possession. And that same instinct to transform the human face into something serene, composed, and almost otherworldly reaches its most striking and unexpected extreme not in China, but across the water in Japan, where beauty takes a turn that might genuinely surprise you. Japan, the white mask and the black smile. The scene shifts one final time before we return to Europe, carrying you now to ancient and feudal Japan, where the fashionable face is painted a striking, flawless white, transforming its wearer into something that looks almost otherworldly by candlelight. But the truly unexpected twist here waits inside the mouth. For many centuries in Japanese history, blackened teeth were considered beautiful, sophisticated, and a proud, visible mark of maturity and social status. Let's start with that famous white face, created using a powder known as ochre. Applied thickly and evenly across the skin, it transformed the complexion into a smooth, pale, almost luminous mask, prized first among the nobility, and later strongly associated with performers, entertainers, and eventually the geisha of later centuries. Against that stark white canvas, small dabs of red at the lips and dark, carefully defined brows stood out with dramatic contrast, creating the elegant, doll-like beauty you may already recognize from later images of geisha culture. As with pale skin in so many civilizations before this one, the whiteness signaled refinement, status, and a face deliberately elevated above the ordinary, sun-touched masses. Some early versions of this powder did contain lead, meaning Japan wasn't entirely spared history's toxic cosmetic curse either, but the visual effect, by every account, was genuinely striking. Then we arrive at the teeth, and this is where your modern instincts get gently, thoroughly overturned. The The practice of blackening teeth, known as ohaguro, was widespread across Japan for an extraordinarily long stretch of history. Far from being seen as unappealing or strange, it was considered attractive, dignified, and a clear marker of adulthood. Married women in particular blackened their teeth regularly, meaning a mouth full of glossy black was read as a signal of maturity and established social status, never as neglect. Picture a culture where a bright white smile looks unfinished and faintly childish, while a deep, gleaming black one reads as elegant, composed, and genuinely refined. It completely inverts nearly everything a modern toothpaste advertisement has ever told you to believe. The dye itself was typically made from iron filings steeped in liquid until they gradually oxidized into a dark, staining solution, often combined with other ingredients to help it adhere properly and darken further with each application. Applying it was a regular, ongoing ritual, since the color needed frequent renewal to remain rich, and even making it a committed, recurring part of a woman's routine rather than a single one-time transformation. The taste and smell were reportedly quite strong and far from pleasant, which only underlines just how seriously this particular beauty standard was taken. People endured a genuinely unpleasant, repetitive process for years on end, simply because that gleaming black smile was, in its own time and place, considered truly beautiful. The eyebrows carried their own surprising twist as well. Among the nobility, fashion called for removing the natural eyebrows entirely, then painting new ones higher up on the forehead, often rendered as soft, smudged, cloud-like marks rather than sharp, defined lines. The resulting face looked serene and remote, its natural expression smoothed into something calm and composed, almost mask-like in its stillness. Combined with the white powder and the blackened teeth, the overall effect was deliberately elevated and otherworldly, a look meant to set its wearer visibly apart from the concerns of ordinary daily life. It was less about appearing warm and approachable, and more about appearing genuinely transcendent. What all of this reveals, more than anything, is just how completely beauty depends on where and when you happen to be standing in history. A pale mask, a blackened smile, and softly floating painted eyebrows would draw alarmed stares on any modern street today. And yet in their own world, at their own particular moment in time, they represented the absolute height of grace and sophistication. There is nothing inherently natural or universal about a bright white smile, an even tan, or a bold, thick eyebrow, only fashions that rise, fall, and quietly fade, each one utterly convinced in its own moment of its own impeccable good taste. The Middle Ages, a war against the sun. The scene shifts back to Europe now, and with it arrives an entirely new chapter, one defined by an unrelenting, almost obsessive battle against something as ordinary and harmless as a little sunshine. You've arrived in medieval Europe, somewhere within the long centuries stretching between the fall of Rome and the dawn of the Renaissance. Pale skin means everything here, because pale skin means noble, indoor, untouched by anything as vulgar as a day of physical labor. So you shield yourself. You veil yourself. You avoid daylight the way you might avoid an enemy who owes you a debt. And when nature simply refuses to cooperate, some go to genuinely alarming lengths to achieve that prized pallor, including, on occasion, deliberate bloodletting, meant to drain away an unfashionable rosy flush from the cheeks. The underlying logic here is brutally, unmistakably simple. In a world where the overwhelming majority of people toiled outdoors in open fields under an unforgiving sky, a tan was the unmistakable, unavoidable mark of a peasant. A woman of noble birth, by contrast, remained indoors, sheltered behind thick stone walls and heavy woven fabrics, so her pale, untouched skin became living, walking proof of her rank in society. Your complexion in this world is a class announcement you simply cannot hide, a walking advertisement for whether you labor for others or are labored for. Defending that pallor meant treating the sun as a genuine, ongoing threat. Women wore veils, wide-brimmed hats, gloves, and long sleeves whenever they ventured outdoors, wrapping themselves against the daylight as though it might leave a permanent mark, which of course was precisely the fear driving the entire practice. Staying indoors altogether was the ideal, and any unavoidable outing became a carefully managed, fully covered operation. If you've ever slathered on sunscreen and hidden gratefully beneath a beach umbrella while everyone around you happily roasted in the sun, congratulations! You would have fit right in at a medieval manor, except your underlying motivation would have been social ruin rather than long-term skin damage. For those whose skin still refused to reach the desired shade of moonlit white, there were remedies, and some of them were genuinely alarming. Various pastes, powders, and washes promised to lighten and brighten the complexion, made from ingredients ranging from the relatively harmless to the frankly hazardous. And then, for the truly committed, there was bloodletting, a medical practice used across the medieval period for all manner of purposes, which some genuinely believed could also drain away a ruddy, overly flushed complexion and leave the face appearing more delicately, fashionably pale. Yes, in the relentless pursuit of the perfect complexion, a person might actually have themselves deliberately bled with a blade. It's difficult to imagine a more literal, more visceral example of suffering for beauty than that. And yet, here we are. Beyond simple paleness, the medieval beauty ideal favored an overall look of smooth, serene, almost saintly perfection. A clear, unblemished complexion, a calm and composed expression, and an overall impression of quiet purity were all prized, very much in keeping with an age deeply saturated in religious devotion and imagery. Bold, obvious cosmetics could actually draw genuine disapproval from the church, which frowned openly on vanity, and viewed any deliberate painting of the face as a form of deceit, even something bordering on sin. So the fashionable medieval woman walked a genuinely careful line, quietly enhancing her natural features while insisting, piously and consistently, that she had done nothing of the sort. That same familiar tension, the desire to look lovely, paired with the social need to appear entirely natural and untouched, was alive and well here too, just as it would be in nearly every era we've already visited tonight. So the medieval beauty routine was less about adding visible drama and more about carefully erasing evidence of sun exposure, evidence of physical labor, evidence of anything that might suggest an ordinary, earthbound life rather than a sheltered, noble one. It was a look built on pale, quiet, protected refinement, achieved through veils, careful avoidance, questionable pastes, and on occasion a deliberately drained vein. It sounds exhausting to modern ears, and by most accounts, it genuinely was, but it flowed directly from a broader medieval world thoroughly obsessed with rank, hierarchy, and outward appearance. And that same obsession with visible, undeniable status was about to fixate on one very specific, rather startling feature, sending fashionable medieval women to war against their own hairlines. The battle for the perfect forehead. Just when you think medieval beauty standards couldn't possibly grow any stranger, we arrive at the forehead. A high, broad, gleaming forehead was considered, quite genuinely, the absolute peak of feminine elegance during large stretches of the medieval period. So fashionable women plucked their own hairlines steadily backward, hair by painstaking hair, deliberately expanding the visible real estate above their eyes. Eyebrows went too, plucked down to near invisibility, leaving behind a face that appeared smooth, serene, and permanently, faintly startled. It was slow, tedious, uncomfortable work, accomplished with little more than a woman's own fingers and considerable patience. And the reward for all that effort was the ability to walk into a room and let onlookers openly admire the sheer, magnificent expanse of your bare, gleaming brow. Priorities, quite clearly, were very different in this particular era of history. To understand this fully, you have to understand exactly what a high, clear forehead was meant to signal. A tall, unbroken brow was linked, in the medieval imagination, to intelligence, nobility, and a certain refined spiritual delicacy. a face that appeared thoughtful and elevated, rather than earthy or common. It fit neatly alongside the era's broader love of pale, smooth, saintly beauty, deliberately echoing the serene, composed faces found in religious paintings and devotional art, where holy figures gaze outward with those same calm, towering foreheads. So the underlying goal was never merely a large forehead purely for its own sake. It was the entire impression of grace, purity, and quiet spiritual superiority that the look was believed to genuinely carry with it. Achieving it, however, was a genuine physical ordeal. Women plucked hair steadily from the front of their hairlines, pulling each strand out individually to gradually push the forehead higher and higher up the head over time. There were no clever shortcuts available here, just tweezing or bare fingers, applied with grim, patient determination across long, uncomfortable sessions that could stretch on for hours. Try to imagine deliberately, methodically giving yourself a receding hairline on purpose, slowly and somewhat painfully, purely because it happens to be the height of current fashion. If plucking a single stubborn eyebrow hair makes your eyes water today, spare a genuine thought for the medieval woman patiently clearing an entire inch of her own scalp in pursuit of elegance. The eyebrows suffered a nearly identical fate, only more severely. Fashion called for brows plucked down to almost nothing at all, thin to the point of near total invisibility, leaving the upper face strikingly bare and smooth. Combined with that newly expanded, carefully plucked hairline, the resulting look featured an enormous, unbroken expanse of pale forehead, with barely a hint of brow remaining above the eyes. It's an appearance that genuinely startles modern eyes when first encountered in surviving portraits, the polar opposite of nearly every bold, full-brow trend that beauty culture would eventually fall back in love with, centuries later. Further proof, if any more were needed, that eyebrow fashion swings wildly across history and answers to absolutely no one. To complete the look properly, that grand, prized forehead needed to be properly showcased, which meant remaining hair was pulled back tightly and tucked carefully away beneath elaborate headdresses, veils, and structured caps. Medieval headwear grew genuinely ambitious during this period, with tall, architecturally structured, occasionally towering creations designed to frame the face and draw every eye directly upward toward that prized, gleaming brow. So a fashionable medieval woman wasn't merely plucking her hairline backward. She was also actively concealing much of her remaining hair, letting an elaborate headdress and her bare forehead do all the visual talking instead. Her actual hair, ironically, became something to hide away entirely, while the smooth expanse of skin above her eyes became the true star of the whole elaborate presentation. It's easy to laugh at all of this today, and honestly, you probably should, because deliberately depilating your own forehead in pursuit of social approval is objectively a fairly ridiculous practice. But it's really no stranger in the end than plenty of other things pursued in the name of beauty both before this era and long after it. And it followed exactly the same iron logic that has governed nearly every beauty standard covered tonight. The look was difficult and time-consuming to achieve, which made it exclusive, which made it desirable, which made people willing to endure real discomfort to attain it. The high medieval forehead was a status symbol worn directly on the face, painstakingly plucked into place one strand at a time. And soon enough, this somber, restrained medieval world would give way entirely to a dazzling new age, one that would drag beauty, vanity, and open self-celebration gloriously back into the spotlight after centuries spent in careful, pious hiding. The Renaissance, beauty reclaimed. The Renaissance sweeps in, and suddenly beauty is no longer something to be quietly endured or piously concealed. It becomes something openly, unapologetically celebrated. Art, wealth, and vanity all bloom together across Europe during this period, and the well-off woman once again finds herself with both the time and the money to fuss over her appearance in genuine earnest. Golden hair returns triumphantly to fashion, faces are kept pale and luminous, and cheeks are given a deliberate, gentle flush of color. Recipe books and beauty manuals begin circulating widely, filled with confident advice and, quite often, deeply questionable ingredients. It marks a true rebirth of the idea that looking beautiful is a worthy pursuit in its own right, wonderful news for everyone involved, except perhaps your skin, because the toxic ingredients of previous centuries are far from finished with you yet. This was an age genuinely intoxicated with beauty in every conceivable sense. The great painters of the period filled their canvases with idealized faces and figures, and those very images helped actively shape what ordinary people came to aspire toward in their own appearance. A soft, rounded, luminous look was widely prized, with a high, smooth forehead still very much in fashion, pale skin remaining the standard, and an overall impression of health, wealth, and cultural refinement. Beauty was now discussed openly and chased deliberately, rather than something requiring pious denial. After centuries of enforced restraint, it must have felt like genuine permission, finally being allowed to admit, out loud, that you cared a great deal about how you looked. Hair became a particular obsession during this period, and blonde was, once again, the shade everyone wanted. Fashionable women went to considerable lengths to lighten their natural hair color toward a golden or reddish gold shade, using various mixtures and treatments meant to bleach the color brighter over repeated applications. One especially popular method involved applying such a mixture, and then sitting outdoors in direct sunlight for hours at a time, wearing specially designed crownless hats that shielded the face from sun exposure, while leaving the hair itself spread out to bake in the open light. So a Renaissance woman would carefully protect her prized pale complexion from the very same sunshine she was simultaneously using to lighten her hair. A small, beautiful contradiction, performed patiently on a rooftop terrace for an entire afternoon. The face, meanwhile, was kept pale and smooth, and here the old, familiar, dangerous ingredients came roaring straight back. White lead-based preparations remained the reliable go-to choice for achieving that flawless, porcelain-like finish, applied generously despite growing, if still limited, awareness of the damage it could gradually cause. Cheeks and lips were touched with red pigments drawn from somewhat safer plant and mineral sources, giving a gentle, healthy-looking flush against all that pale, powdered skin. The overall ideal remained to appear radiant and effortlessly lovely, while behind the scenes involving a genuinely enormous amount of effort and no small measure of quiet poison. What's particularly fascinating about this specific era is the widespread circulation of beauty knowledge itself. Books filled with recipes and closely guarded secrets began circulating throughout Europe, offering eager readers detailed instructions for lotions, hair treatments, skin washes, and cosmetic preparations of every kind, some genuinely sensible, many wildly bizarre, and a few, frankly, quite hazardous. This represents, in a very real sense, an early ancestor of the beauty tips and video tutorials that would eventually flood magazines and screens centuries later, only here handwritten or printed on paper and passed carefully between households. People collected, shared, and personally tested these formulas, hungry for whatever secret might unlock a better complexion or brighter, more luminous hair. The dream of the perfect beauty routine, and the genuine willingness to try nearly anything that promised results, was fast becoming a documented, actively shared cultural pursuit. But this new boldness would soon take a genuinely dangerous turn, in pursuit of one particular, dreamy, alluring detail, as fashionable women across parts of Italy began dripping actual poison directly into their own eyes. Belladonna, beauty and blindness. Let's talk now about what may be the single most romantic, and simultaneously most reckless, beauty trend you'll encounter tonight. In parts of Renaissance Italy, fashionable women took to dripping the extracted juice of a particular plant directly into their eyes, deliberately widening their pupils into large, dark, dreamily dilated circles. The plant in question is deadly nightshade, and its Italian name, Belladonna, translates literally to beautiful woman, which tells you nearly everything you need to know about the priorities driving this particular trend. The visual effect was genuinely striking, soft focus, mysterious, undeniably alluring. The side effects, unfortunately, included blurred vision, a racing heart, and over time, genuine, lasting damage to eyesight itself. Nothing quite says timeless elegance like slowly sacrificing your own vision for the sake of one smoldering, captivating glance across a crowded room. The compounds found in Belladonna extract, when introduced into the eyes, cause the pupils to widen dramatically, leaving them large, dark, and glossy. To the aesthetic sensibilities of the time, this created an appearance of allure, softness, and heightened emotional intensity. The wide, dark eyes of someone gazing at you with what appeared to be genuine, dreamy interest. There was a genuine cultural belief that dilated pupils made a woman appear more captivating and desirable, and modern psychological research actually offers some support for the underlying instinct. Humans do tend to unconsciously read widened pupils as a subtle signal of interest and attraction. So the basic impulse behind the trend wasn't entirely without foundation. The method itself, however, was genuinely reckless. Belladonna is called deadly nightshade for good reason. It's a substantially poisonous plant, and introducing its extract directly into the eyes was never a harmless little beauty hack. In the short term, artificially dilated pupils lose their normal ability to properly regulate incoming light, meaning the world becomes uncomfortably bright, harsh, and blurred, with anything up close becoming a genuine struggle to focus on clearly. Picture attempting to glide elegantly through a candlelit gathering, while everything around you swims in a hazy, overexposed glare, unable to clearly make out the face of the very person standing directly in front of you. That seductive, mysterious gaze arrived bundled together with the very practical reality of barely being able to see properly, which surely led to more than a few awkward social encounters, and likely a stray collision or two with unseen furniture. The longer-term consequences were considerably more serious. Repeated, sustained exposure to belladonna extract could cause lasting, permanent damage to vision, and there remained the broader danger of the poison affecting the body more widely, given that this is a substance genuinely capable of causing serious harm, and in high enough doses, even death. Women applying this extract were, quite literally, dousing one of the most delicate and sensitive parts of the human body with a known toxin, over and over again, trading away real and precious eyesight for nothing more than the temporary appearance of alluring, dreamy eyes. It's a genuinely grim bargain, and it captures something essential about the entire reckless spirit running through so much of historical beauty culture. A persistent willingness to sacrifice something real and irreplaceable for a fleeting, momentary impression of attractiveness. What makes belladonna such a perfect symbol for tonight's entire journey is how neatly it packages the whole underlying absurdity into a single practice. The very name pays tribute to beauty. The visual effect genuinely does tap into something real about human attraction and perception, and the cost was potential, permanent blindness. It's romantic and reckless in equal measure, a trend that sounds like it belongs in a poet's carefully chosen metaphor, yet functioned, in cold practical reality, like a slow-acting poison. If you ever needed clear proof that beauty standards can override even basic survival instinct, here it is, dripped lovingly, deliberately, into the eyes of women who wanted nothing more than to appear enchanting across a crowded, candlelit room. And belladonna was far from the only poison in the fashionable Renaissance woman's arsenal, because this era's growing obsession with a flawless, otherworldly complexion was about to reach a truly infamous peak in the royal court of England. Elizabethan England, the mask of youth. Now we arrive at one of tonight's most genuinely infamous chapters, the reign of the white-lead face in Elizabethan England. The most coveted cosmetic product of this entire age is a smooth paste made from white lead mixed with vinegar, painted on thickly to create a poreless, porcelain, almost ghostly complexion. It works beautifully at first. Then slowly and steadily, it begins poisoning you, damaging your skin, graying your teeth, and quietly wrecking your long-term health, which naturally sends you reaching for still more of the very same paste, in a desperate attempt to conceal the damage that paste itself has caused. It is one of history's most genuinely vicious beauty cycles. A smooth, flawless white mask painted directly over the ruin it is quietly, patiently creating underneath. This particular product had a name, Venetian ceruse, and it was considered, without question, the very finest cosmetic that money could buy anywhere in Europe. Made by combining white lead with vinegar, it produced a remarkably fine, smooth paste that spread evenly across the skin and dried into a flawless, almost luminous white finish. Compared to the grainier, patchier alternatives available elsewhere, ceruse genuinely looked beautiful, delivering that pale, even, radiant complexion that Elizabethan fashion demanded above absolutely everything else. It was expensive, exclusive, and deeply coveted, the luxury foundation of its entire era, and wealthy women applied it generously in pursuit of that untouchable porcelain glow. On the surface, it delivered precisely what it promised. Underneath that surface, it was doing something genuinely terrible. Lead absorbed steadily through the skin, and daily application sustained over months and years led to a slow, cumulative buildup within the body, bringing with it the entire miserable catalog of symptoms associated with lead poisoning. The skin beneath the paste gradually became damaged, discolored, and coarse, precisely the flaws the makeup itself was originally meant to conceal. Teeth could darken and decay. Hair could thin. More serious, systemic effects crept in gradually as the toxic metal steadily accumulated within the body over years of use. The tragic, self-defeating genius of this trap is obvious in hindsight. As the ceruse gradually wrecked a woman's natural complexion, the only socially acceptable response available to her was to apply an even thicker layer of the very same ceruse to cover up the wreckage, feeding directly into the exact cycle that was slowly destroying her. The full routine extended well beyond the white base alone. Over the ceruse, women often added color to cheeks and lips using vermilion, a bright red pigment that happened to contain mercury, because apparently one poisonous metal applied to the face simply wasn't considered sufficient. Some women also used additional washes and treatments containing other harsh substances, intended to brighten the skin further or remove stubborn blemishes, layering one hazard directly on top of another. To finish the entire look, a thin glaze of egg white was sometimes applied over the whole face, creating a smooth, glossy, almost lacquered finish that helped set everything firmly in place. This also meant, quite literally, that the wearer had to keep her facial expression carefully still and controlled, since too much movement risked cracking the delicate glazed surface entirely. That particular detail is genuinely worth pausing on, because it reveals just how demanding this beauty standard truly was. A face fully made up in ceruse and finished with an egg-white glaze was less like wearing ordinary makeup, and considerably more like wearing a fragile, brittle shell, one that actively discouraged wide smiles, genuine laughter, or any lively, expressive movement that might crack its carefully maintained finish. The fashionable Elizabethan woman was expected to remain composed, still, and serene, partly out of cultivated temperament, and partly because her entire face would quite literally begin to crack apart if she wasn't. It's a striking image to sit with, an entire social class of women moving carefully and deliberately through candle-lit rooms, holding their features perfectly steady beneath a mask that was slowly, patiently poisoning them the entire time. This represented toxic beauty at its absolute historical peak, a genuine perfect storm of lead, mercury, and overwhelming social pressure, all applied directly and repeatedly to the face in pursuit of an impossible, unattainable porcelain ideal. It damaged health, ruined skin over time, and demanded that women physically restrain their own natural expressions behind a brittle, fragile white shell, all in service of resembling the flawless complexion so prized by the fashion of the age. And no single figure embodied this dangerous, demanding fashion more completely than the queen who reigned directly over it. A woman whose painted white face would become one of the single most recognizable images in the whole of English history. Queen Elizabeth I and the Mask of Power. No one embodies this lead-painted era better than the Queen herself. After surviving a serious bout of smallpox, which left her natural skin visibly scarred, Elizabeth I leaned into the white mask more completely than perhaps anyone before her, applying it in progressively thicker layers as the years steadily passed. Her royal court dutifully copied the look she set, and her carefully constructed public image, pale, powdered, and seemingly eternally youthful, became the very standard the entire kingdom rushed to imitate. It functioned as propaganda every bit as much as it functioned as simple makeup. A face deliberately engineered to project power and timeless agelessness, even as the actual woman underneath continued aging like everyone else around her. To properly understand her famous white face, you first have to understand exactly what had happened to it. Elizabeth contracted smallpox, a brutal, frequently fatal disease in this era, and though she ultimately survived, it left her natural skin marked and visibly scarred, exactly as it did to so many others who managed to survive the illness during this period. The thick cerusse she subsequently applied served a genuinely practical purpose that went well beyond simple fashion, concealing those visible scars beneath a smooth, even, seemingly flawless surface. So her now famous white mask wasn't simply vanity for its own sake. It functioned as a deliberate shield, hiding the visible damage of serious illness while presenting the wider world with a face that appeared entirely untouched, fully controlled, and carefully perfected, regardless of the actual reality underneath. As the years passed, that protective mask grew progressively heavier and increasingly theatrical. Elizabeth understood, perhaps better than nearly any other ruler of her era, that public image itself was a genuine form of political power, and she cultivated her own image with extraordinary, sustained care. She was an unmarried queen ruling in a world that openly doubted whether a woman could effectively rule entirely on her own, so projecting visible strength, permanence, and a kind of deliberate, timeless majesty mattered enormously to her political survival. Her pale, ageless, elaborately painted face, framed by striking red hair and dazzling jewels, became a deliberate, calculated symbol of her authority and her carefully cultivated semi-mythical status as England's Virgin Queen. She wasn't simply getting dressed each morning. She was constructing a living political icon, one careful layer at a time. This is precisely where beauty and politics fuse together completely and inseparably. Surviving portraits of Elizabeth from her later years increasingly depicted her not as she actually appeared in reality, but as an idealized, ageless figure, her face rendered as a smooth, pale mask entirely untouched by the passage of time. Court painters worked from an officially approved image, sometimes referred to by historians as the Mask of Youth, carefully ensuring the queen appeared eternally young and radiant regardless of how many actual years had genuinely passed. This was propaganda in the truest, most literal sense. A controlled, deliberate visual message circulated widely across the realm, insisting that the queen, and by extension her entire reign, remained as strong and enduring as ever. Her face had effectively become a brand, and she managed that brand with a level of discipline any modern celebrity might genuinely envy. Of course, the underlying reality beneath all that paint was considerably harsher than the polished public image suggested. Beneath the thick cerusse, lead was doing its slow, patient damage, and surviving accounts of the aging queen describe a face genuinely marked by decades of heavy cosmetic use, combined with the natural ravages of time she was working so desperately hard to conceal. There is something both quietly sad and deeply, recognizably human in this picture. A powerful, formidable woman armored behind a mask that was itself steadily, quietly harming her. maintaining a carefully constructed illusion of eternal youth that her entire court politely agreed to believe in. The gap between the eternally youthful queen depicted in official portraits and the actual aging woman applying yet another careful layer each morning captures something genuinely poignant about the whole strange spirit of the era's beauty ideals. Elizabeth effectively turned the toxic fashion of her age into a genuine masterclass in image management, proving conclusively that a carefully constructed public face could function as a real, tangible instrument of political power. Her subjects imitated her pale mask. Her court painters immortalized her ageless legend on canvas, and her particular look came to define an entire era of English beauty standards. She demonstrated to the world that appearance itself could be deeply political, that a face could function as a genuine public statement, and that even a reigning queen was willing to slowly poison herself in careful, measured doses in order to maintain the exact image she believed her survival required. The French court, a secret language written on skin. As this obsession with the flawless, otherworldly mask spread steadily across Europe, it took on a playful, coded new twist in the glittering courts of France, where a small black dot pressed against the skin could suddenly speak entire volumes without a single word being spoken aloud. Fast forward now to the dazzling French royal courts, where a small, unexpected accessory quickly takes over every fashionable face. The beauty patch, known in French as the mouche, meaning literally fly. These tiny shapes, cut from black silk or velvet, were originally stuck onto the skin for a genuinely practical reason, concealing scars and blemishes left behind by illness or the general wear of daily life. But it didn't take long before they developed into a full craze entirely their own. Better still, they gradually developed a kind of secret social language. A patch placed near the corner of the mouth was understood to mean one particular thing. A patch positioned beside the eye carried an entirely different meaning, and an entire silent, flirtatious conversation could be quietly conducted across a crowded, candle-lit ballroom, using nothing more than a handful of carefully placed dots. It was flirtation, decoration, and clever concealment, all rolled into one small accessory, gloriously, unnecessarily elaborate. The patches began, sensibly enough, as a genuine practical solution to a real, widespread problem. In an age when smallpox left countless faces visibly scarred, and when even heavy cosmetics couldn't fully conceal every mark, a small patch of dark fabric offered a neat, elegant way to cover a blemish, a pockmark, or an unwanted spot. Cut from black silk, velvet, or taffeta into small decorative shapes, these patches were dabbed with a natural adhesive and pressed carefully onto the skin, concealing imperfections while simultaneously adding a striking dark accent against an otherwise pale, powdered face. What began purely as clever camouflage quickly transformed into outright fashion, because that sharp visual contrast of black against white proved genuinely eye-catching, and people at court very quickly took notice. Once the trend properly caught on, the shapes themselves multiplied and grew steadily more playful and inventive. Patches began appearing as simple round dots, but also as stars, crescent moons, small hearts, and even, for the truly committed fashion followers, tiny detailed silhouettes of ships or human figures. A particularly fashionable woman might wear several different patches at once, carefully arranged just so, effectively turning her own skin into a small decorative canvas for these dark, ornamental shapes. It sounds delightfully whimsical, and by most accounts, it genuinely was an entire royal court full of powdered aristocrats dotting their faces with tiny velvet stars and crescents, all quite seriously convinced this represented the absolute height of contemporary style. Fashion trends have always carried a certain built-in absurdity, and this particular one wore its own absurdity rather openly, right there on full display on everyone's cheek. Then came the truly delightful part of the whole tradition, the supposed secret language attached to exactly where you chose to wear your patch, transforming a simple scrap of black silk into a genuine tool of flirtation and social intrigue. A patch placed near the corner of the eye might suggest deep passion. One positioned near the lips might hint at an openness to being kissed. One placed on the cheek might signal budding romantic interest. And so on, through an entire imagined vocabulary of positions and corresponding meanings. Whether every single courtier genuinely followed this strict, formalized code, or simply enjoyed playing along with the entertaining idea of one, these small patches allowed people to hint, tease, and flirt discreetly across a crowded room without ever needing to say a single word out loud. It functioned, in many ways, as a kind of social media centuries ahead of its time. Private messages posted directly and visibly onto the face for anyone paying close attention to read. There was even said to be a political dimension layered into the practice in certain periods. With the particular side of the face, a person chose to patch supposedly signaling which political faction or court party they personally favored. Beauty and political allegiance mingled together in ways that seem almost absurd today, meaning a single dot placed in the wrong spot might accidentally align you publicly with a cause you never actually intended to endorse, purely in the name of following current fashion. It illustrates just how thoroughly woven these small decorative marks had become into the broader social fabric of court life, carrying meaning that extended far beyond mere surface decoration. A patch, in this context, was genuinely never just a patch. It was simultaneously a statement, a flirtation, a clever disguise, and occasionally a public declaration, all packed into something smaller than a fingernail. The beauty patch stands today as a perfect small emblem of French court life during this era, a trend that transformed a purely practical cover-up into an elaborate, layered game of style and social signaling. It reveals a world with genuine time and wealth to spare, one capable of transforming something as mundane as covering a scar into an entire coded language of desire and political allegiance. It was clever, delightfully frivolous, and entirely of its specific moment. Exactly the kind of fashion only a genuinely leisured, wealthy court could ever have dreamed up. But those very same glittering courts were quietly hiding a far less charming secret beneath all that powder and all those decorative patches. One you likely would have smelled long before you ever managed to see it. The Baroque era, powder, perfume, and the smell beneath it all. Here we must gently address the smell. In the grand Baroque courts of this period, regular bathing had fallen deeply out of fashion, viewed by many physicians and ordinary people alike as genuinely unhealthy, even actively dangerous. So instead of washing, the fashionable solution became simply covering with powder, covering with heavy, potent perfume, covering with layer upon layer of scented everything imaginable. All of it aimed at masking a body that hadn't encountered soap and water in a very long time indeed. The resulting effect was a world of dazzling silk gowns and elaborate towering wigs, all floating together in a thick haze of floral perfume, layered over something distinctly less floral underneath. Beauty here was less about achieving genuine cleanliness, and far more about achieving a convincing, well-executed disguise. This widespread aversion to bathing stemmed from genuine, if badly mistaken, contemporary beliefs about health and disease. Many physicians of the era held that water, especially warm water, opened the pores of the skin and allowed dangerous disease to slip directly into the body. A genuinely terrifying prospect in an age repeatedly ravaged by plagues and illnesses nobody could properly explain or understand. Full immersion in water was therefore widely viewed as a genuine risk, something to be actively avoided rather than casually enjoyed. Instead of soaking, people wiped themselves down using dry or lightly dampened cloths, changed their linen undergarments regularly, and trusted that fresh linen worn directly against the skin would effectively draw away accumulated dirt and odor. Cleanliness, in the prevailing mindset of the era, was fundamentally about your shirt, rather than about your actual body underneath it, a distinction your own nose would almost certainly and strongly dispute. With regular bathing effectively off the table, perfume quickly became an absolute necessity rather than a simple luxury. Heavy, potent fragrances were applied liberally to the body, to clothing, to elaborate wigs, and even to gloves, all in a determined effort to overpower whatever odor had inevitably built up beneath. The wealthy indulged freely in rich, genuinely expensive scents, and smelling costly became its own quiet, unmistakable mark of social status, a way of announcing personal refinement through a visible, lingering cloud of imported fragrance. But there is, naturally, only so much even the strongest available perfume can realistically accomplish against an unwashed body wrapped in elaborate, heavy, multiple layers of clothing, standing beneath the warm glow of ballroom candlelight for hours at a stretch. The likely result was a strange, thick mingling of sweet floral notes layered directly over a much sharper underlying reality, a combined scent no single candle could ever fully conquer or disguise. Powder handled much of the remaining visual heavy lifting. Faces were dusted pale, and the towering, elaborate wigs so fashionable during this era were coated liberally in white powder, often scented, which helped absorb excess oil and mask unwanted odors while simultaneously creating that fashionable frosted appearance everyone desired. This powder shed constantly throughout the day, drifting steadily onto shoulders, furniture, and floors, meaning grand formal rooms were perpetually dusted with the accumulated fallout of everyone's individual grooming routine. Between the powder settling in the hair, the paint carefully applied to the face, and the perfume liberally applied to absolutely everything else, a fashionable Baroque aristocrat was, in essence, a beautifully decorated cover-up, genuinely gorgeous from a respectful distance, and best appreciated from exactly that distance rather than up close. The eye in this arrangement was thoroughly charmed, even as the nose quietly filed its own private complaint. It's worth remembering, in fairness, that none of this was viewed as neglect or simple laziness by the people actually living through it at the time. By the prevailing standards and genuine medical beliefs of their own era, they were doing the sensible, even the responsibly healthy thing, protecting their bodies from the perceived dangers of water exposure, while presenting a polished, carefully fragrant exterior to the wider world. They simply had the underlying science entirely backward, avoiding the very washing that would have genuinely served them well, and instead masking the resulting consequences with layer upon layer of scent and powder. It's a genuinely humbling reminder that every historical era, very much including our own, remains confidently certain about certain things it has gotten completely wrong, and that beauty routines, across every century, are ultimately built on both the accumulated knowledge and the genuine mistakes of their particular moment in time. So picture now the full Baroque court caught in its complete glory, a shimmering scene of silk, jewels, elaborately painted faces, and mountainous powdered wigs, all wrapped together in a heavy, persistent fog of perfume working very hard indeed to conceal something underneath. It is dazzling and slightly alarming in nearly equal measure, beauty functioning as a magnificent, elaborate disguise, draped carefully over a body that had rarely, if ever, actually been washed. The Georgian era, hair that touched the ceiling. If you thought elaborate, oversized hair was purely a modern invention, prepare yourself, because in the Georgian era, hairstyles reached truly architectural heights previously unimaginable. Built up over hidden wire frames and cushioned pads, packed generously with pomade, dusted thickly with powder, and stacked so impressively tall that it becomes an active hazard to doorways and low-hanging chandeliers alike. These towering creations could take many hours to construct properly, and were sometimes left in place for days or even entire weeks at a time, which, combined with the trapped grease and warmth, created something disturbingly close to a living environment for a whole host of unwelcome tiny guests. You didn't simply wear this hairstyle. You maintained it, you defended it, and you quietly hoped nothing decided to move in and take up permanent residence. The construction of these hairstyles represented a genuine feat of practical engineering, A skilled hairdresser would build the hair upward over pads, cushions, or hidden wire supports, carefully teasing and arranging the wearer's natural hair, often supplemented generously with additional false hairpieces, into a soaring structure rising high above the head. The entire elaborate edifice was held firmly together using generous amounts of pomade, a thick, greasy styling substance, then finished with a coating of scented powder to help set both the color and the overall shape. On top of this carefully constructed base, all manner of decoration could then be added: ribbons, feathers, delicate artificial flowers, jewels, and other ornamental touches, effectively turning the entire head into a small stage for elaborate personal display. The taller and more extravagant the creation, the more genuinely fashionable it was considered, and the social elite competed openly to outdo one another in sheer height and creative ambition. Living day to day with one of these towering creations was a genuine ordeal that makes even a truly terrible modern hair day sound like a relaxing spa treatment by comparison. Because they required so much time and considerable effort to build properly, these elaborate styles were frequently left in place for many consecutive days, sometimes stretching into weeks, rather than being carefully taken down and rebuilt fresh each single night. Women often slept sitting upright, or using specially designed supports, specifically to avoid crushing their carefully constructed hair, resting their necks against wooden or otherwise firm cradles, rather than a soft, comfortable pillow. Try to imagine committing so completely to a single hairstyle that you fundamentally rearrange the entire way you sleep around it, night after night, purely to preserve a towering structure you likely can't even fully see the top of yourself. The greasy pomade, the trapped body warmth, and the sheer extended duration of wear created, predictably enough, a genuine hospitality problem for unwanted visitors. Left largely undisturbed for weeks at a stretch, these elaborate hairstyles could attract lice and other small, unwelcome creatures. There are enduring historical accounts, some likely exaggerated somewhat over time in the retelling, describing women using long, thin specialized tools to scratch carefully at their own scalps through the structure, without disturbing the style itself. Whether or not every single lurid historical tale is literally, precisely true, the basic underlying reality stands firm. A warm, greasy mass of hair left largely undisturbed for extended periods is simply not a pleasant environment, and keeping it looking presentable was a constant, genuinely itchy ongoing battle. All that visible glamour came bundled together with an entire hidden ecosystem most people would probably rather not think too closely about. These impressive towers also caused very real, practical chaos in day-to-day Georgian life. Hair piled so dramatically high forced women to duck carefully through doorways, sit with real caution inside carriages, and steer well clear of low-hanging chandeliers and open flames, since powdered, heavily greased hair positioned near an open candle flame represented a genuine fire hazard waiting to happen. The styles themselves could grow quite heavy, straining the neck considerably and making genuinely graceful movement a real ongoing challenge, all in dedicated service of a look meant to announce wealth, leisure, and fashionable daring to everyone who happened to be watching. It was beauty as pure, unapologetic spectacle, impractical to the very point of outright absurdity, which was precisely what made it such a genuinely effective, unmistakable display of social status. Only someone with essentially nothing more pressing to worry about could realistically carry an entire miniature garden balanced on top of her own head. The Georgian Hair Tower stands today as one of history's great monuments to fashionable excess, a genuine triumph of raw ambition over basic comfort, everyday hygiene, and ordinary architectural sense. It transformed the human head into a canvas for the grandest possible personal statement, defying gravity, doorways, and plain common sense all at the same time. And at the very dizzying peak of all this soaring, powdered madness stood one particular woman whose name would forever remain linked with beauty at its most extravagant, and ultimately, its most doomed. Marie Antoinette, spectacle at the summit. At the absolute height of all this Georgian excess stands one truly unforgettable figure. Marie Antoinette transformed hair and personal beauty into pure, unrestrained spectacle, commissioning hairstyles so elaborate, so genuinely enormous, that they became the talk of the entire European continent. Miniature ships, ornamental gardens, and even entire small decorative scenes were rumored to be built directly into these towering hairstyles, each new creation more ambitious than the last. Her face remained powdered pale, her cheeks rouged in a bright, unmistakable red, her entire look carefully designed to broadcast wealth and social status clearly, even from across an enormous, crowded room. It represents beauty pushed to its most theatrical and ultimately most unsustainable extreme, a genuinely glittering high point that history would soon come to treat as a cautionary warning, rather than an aspiration to be admired. Her hairstyles were legendary in her own time, and rightly so. Working closely with a celebrated royal hairdresser, she wore towering creations that rose to truly remarkable heights, elaborate structures decorated with an astonishing, ever-changing range of ornaments and themes. The most famous surviving stories describe styles built directly around miniature scenes, including one said to feature a small model ship, created specifically to honor a naval victory. Her hair effectively transformed into a genuine stage for storytelling and public display. Whether every specific detail passed down has been slightly embroidered by legend over the centuries, the underlying spirit remains entirely real. This was hair functioning as genuine art installation, as deliberate political statement, as sheer, jaw-dropping public spectacle. She didn't simply follow existing fashion trends. She detonated them outright, setting new trends the entire royal court then scrambled desperately to imitate. Her face followed the broader fashion conventions of the age, pale and carefully painted, and here, rouge took absolute center stage. Bright red rouge was applied boldly and generously to the cheeks, creating a striking splash of vivid color against otherwise powdered white skin, and the sheer intensity of that color application was itself a genuine marker of social rank at the French royal court. Far from being a subtle, natural-looking flush, this was a deliberate, vivid, unmistakable statement, and the more vivid the color, the higher the implied social status of the wearer. Combined with the pale skin, carefully defined features, and elaborately towering hair, the overall effect was dramatic and genuinely unmistakable, a face specifically built to command full attention and announce nobility clearly across the vast, glittering halls of Versailles. Restraint was never remotely the goal here. Total visual dominance was. All of this required genuinely staggering amounts of time, money, and dedicated labor, which was, of course, very much part of the underlying point. Maintaining such an elaborate look demanded skilled hairdressers, dedicated personal attendants, expensive imported powders and pomades, costly cosmetics, and many hours of daily sustained effort. An entire dedicated apparatus devoted purely to producing the Queen's daily public appearance. Her beauty functioned as a full-scale production, a daily performance of wealth and privilege made visibly, undeniably real on her own body. In a country where ordinary people were simultaneously struggling, and in many regions, genuinely going hungry, that lavish, highly conspicuous spending on personal appearance would eventually come to symbolize a monarchy dangerously, visibly out of touch with the suffering of its own people, and public resentment gradually gathered around the Queen's carefully constructed image. That represents the sharp, tragic turn in her story. The very same extravagance that had made Marie Antoinette a genuine beauty icon also helped make her a lightning rod for public anger, as her carefully cultivated image became a focal point for growing resentment toward the crown's visible indulgence, while much of the nation genuinely suffered, fair or not, and much of the loudest criticism directed at her personally was ultimately unfair and considerably exaggerated. Her towering hair and elaborately painted face gradually transformed into powerful symbols of everything the coming revolution had come to despise. The very beauty that had once dazzled an entire royal court curdled over time into a damning emblem of privilege and excess, and the queen who had once reigned so completely over fashion would ultimately lose far more than simply her signature hairstyle. Marie Antoinette marks the absolute summit of aristocratic beauty as pure, unrestrained theater, the precise moment when hair, powder, and rouge reached their most extreme and ultimately most unsustainable heights. She embodied an entire world where outward appearance was everything, and excess itself was the whole underlying point. Right at the very edge of the cliff, that entire glittering world was about to come tumbling down completely. Her story effectively closes out the age of towering wigs and elaborately painted courts on a note where genuine glamour and looming doom sit intertwined together. Because sweeping change was coming, sudden and genuinely dramatic, and in its wake, beauty itself would swing hard in the opposite direction entirely, trading spectacle and excess for an entirely new ideal built around simplicity, softness, and a deliberate, celebrated return to the natural human face. The Regency era, the return of the natural face. After all that powder and excess, the pendulum swings hard in the opposite direction. The Regency era decides, rather abruptly, that the natural look is back in fashion, and suddenly heavy, visible makeup is considered vulgar, excessive, and more than a little embarrassing. The fashionable woman now aims to appear effortlessly fresh, dewy, and untouched, as though she simply woke up looking flawless, without any effort at all. Of course, achieving that convincingly natural look still required real, sustained effort, and some of the lotions and treatments promising a pure, healthy complexion quietly contained the very same dangerous ingredients as ever. It turns out that looking as though you're wearing no products whatsoever is its own kind of demanding project, and not always a particularly safe one either. This shift was partly a direct reaction to everything that had come immediately before it. After the towering wigs, thick paint, and conspicuous excess of the previous decades, and following the political upheaval that had toppled the old aristocratic order across the Channel in France, heavy artifice fell out of favor remarkably quickly. Appearing obviously painted now suggested vanity, dishonesty, and an uncomfortable association with the discredited old regime. The new ideal became refinement through restraint, a soft, healthy, natural beauty that seemed to spring directly from good breeding and clean living, rather than from a jar of paint. Fashion had decided, somewhat ironically, that the true height of elegance was appearing to make no effort at all, which, as always throughout this story, required a great deal of careful, hidden effort to actually pull off convincingly. Faces still aimed for pale and clear, but the underlying goal now was a fresh, luminous glow, rather than the stark white mask of previous generations. Cosmetics were used with a lighter, far more secretive hand, a subtle touch of color on the lips and cheeks meant to look like a natural, healthy bloom rather than an obviously applied pigment. The entire point was subtlety, quietly enhancing whatever nature had already provided while publicly pretending you had done essentially nothing at all. If a woman was caught looking too obviously made up, it registered as a real, if small, social embarrassment, so the genuine artistry of the era lay in near total invisibility. Beauty's greatest success, in this particular moment, was that no one could easily tell it had been carefully performed at all. Skincare took on considerably greater importance during this era's broader quest for a naturally flawless-looking face. Women turned increasingly to lotions, creams, and various washes promising to smooth, soften, brighten, and generally preserve the complexion, chasing genuine underlying skin quality rather than simply relying on heavy surface coverage. This sounds considerably healthier in spirit, and in many ways it genuinely was. But the era hadn't suddenly grown entirely wise about the ingredients being used. Popular preparations of the day could still quietly contain harsh or outright toxic substances, including lead and mercury compounds lurking inside celebrated, elegantly marketed complexion tonics that promised natural purity while actually delivering slow, cumulative harm. There is a real, quiet irony worth sitting with here. The Regency era prided itself openly on natural, wholesome beauty, on rejecting the poisoned excess of previous generations in favor of something considerably purer and more honest. Yet it kept quietly reaching for the very same dangerous ingredients, simply repackaged now inside gentler sounding, more tastefully marketed creams. The visible look changed. The surrounding marketing changed. But the underlying willingness to apply genuinely risky substances directly to the skin, in dogged pursuit of perfection, endured largely unchanged. It's a pattern you should recognize clearly by this point in tonight's story. Each successive era genuinely convinced it has finally gotten beauty right, while quietly, unknowingly repeating the very same historical mistakes in fresh, updated packaging. Still, the Regency period marked a genuine turning point in broader taste, a decisive cultural move away from spectacle, and toward an entirely new ideal built around effortless, understated beauty, one that would continue to echo forward for a considerable time afterward. It planted a lasting cultural idea that true elegance means appearing naturally lovely, rather than obviously, deliberately adorned. A notion that beauty culture has continued wrestling with ever since. But that persistent underlying tension, between genuinely wanting to look beautiful and simultaneously needing to appear entirely untouched, was about to tighten considerably into something far stricter and stranger, as the coming Victorian age wrapped the entire subject of makeup in a heavy, suffocating cloak of moral shame. The Victorian era, beauty as moral crime. The Victorians took that established modesty and transformed it into something resembling full-blown moral law. Openly wearing visible makeup was now considered not merely unfashionable, but genuinely scandalous, closely associated in the public mind with vanity, dishonesty, and women of questionable moral reputation. A respectable Victorian lady was expected, above all else, to be naturally beautiful, which left the genuinely fashion-conscious woman in a rather awkward social position. So she cheated, quietly and cleverly. She pinched her own cheeks and bit her lips to bring up a natural-looking flush of color, dusted on the very faintest hint of powder, and swore up and down, with a perfectly straight face, that she wore absolutely nothing at all. It was an entire era built around secret beauty routines, all carefully performed behind firmly closed doors and consistently, confidently denied to anyone who asked. The social disapproval surrounding visible cosmetics ran genuinely deep, carrying real moral weight throughout Victorian society. This era prized virtue, purity, and modesty in women above nearly everything else, and visibly applied cosmetics clashed violently with that broader cultural ideal. Paint on the face suggested, to many observers, that a woman was hiding something, deceiving people about her true natural appearance, or worse still, that she belonged to a disreputable profession where such visible artifice was simply expected. A properly respectable woman, according to the prevailing thinking of the era, should radiate natural health and inner goodness entirely from within, her rosy cheeks and bright eyes understood as the honest, natural product of clean living and a genuinely pure heart. To paint them on artificially was, in this framework, essentially to lie, and lying about your own face hinted uncomfortably at deeper, more troubling dishonesty underneath. This left respectable Victorian women in a genuinely difficult bind, because the simple human desire to look one's best is an entirely natural impulse that no amount of public moralizing could realistically switch off entirely. The practical solution became subterfuge, an entire array of discreet tricks designed to enhance the complexion while maintaining complete public deniability. Women pinched their cheeks firmly to bring up a natural flush of color, bit their lips to redden them temporarily, and used clear or only barely tinted balms that could easily pass as simple, innocent skincare. They dusted on faint, essentially undetectable amounts of powder, and consistently swore they had touched absolutely nothing. It amounted to an entire culture of beauty built on plausible deniability, women quietly doing the very thing they publicly, loudly condemned in others. Skincare, being broadly considered respectable and genuinely health-oriented, offered a socially acceptable outlet for this underlying beauty impulse to express itself openly. A Victorian lady could openly fuss over her own complexion using lotions, creams, and gentle washes, because caring properly for the health of one's skin was framed as virtuous rather than vain. So enormous collective energy poured into achieving naturally clear, pale, smooth skin through dedicated cleansing routines, protective measures taken against sun exposure, and countless preparations promising genuine purity and softness. The line separating skincare from cosmetics was carefully, deliberately policed throughout this era. One category permitted and considered pious, the other forbidden and genuinely shameful, even though both ultimately served the exact same underlying wish to appear more beautiful. The Victorians had, in effect, simply relabeled ordinary vanity as wellness, and quietly carried on much as before. Underneath all this strict public propriety, a genuine commercial world was already quietly stirring beneath the surface. Beauty preparations were being bought, sold, and advertised, often quite discreetly, and homemade recipes were passed between women like carefully whispered secrets. The underlying demand never actually vanished during this period. It simply moved underground, hidden carefully behind respectable language and firmly closed doors. This ongoing tension between a society that publicly condemned visible makeup and a population that still very much genuinely wanted to look lovely created precisely the kind of sustained pressure from which a booming, openly commercial beauty industry would eventually, inevitably erupt. The forbidden cannot realistically stay forbidden forever when the underlying desire driving it remains genuinely universal, and the pot, throughout this entire era, was slowly but steadily coming to a full boil. So the Victorian era gives us the genuinely strange spectacle of an age deeply obsessed with beauty while simultaneously, publicly pretending to disdain it entirely. A world built on secret pinches, whispered recipes, and firmly, repeatedly denied powder. It reveals, more than perhaps any other era covered tonight, just how powerful and genuinely persistent the human wish to enhance our own appearance really is, surviving even under intense, sustained moral disapproval by simply going carefully into hiding. And it quietly set the stage for a dramatic coming reversal, because the very hunger the Victorians had tried so hard to shame into silence was about to burst gloriously, openly into public view, launching an entire industry that would eventually put beauty products on every counter and in every home imaginable. The poison behind the propriety. Behind that innocent Victorian modesty, however, lurked something genuinely alarming. To achieve that prized pale, translucent complexion, some women turned to complexion wafers and tonics that contained actual arsenic, quite literally consuming small doses of poison in pursuit of a delicate, luminous glow. Others dabbed on lotions laced with lead, or continued the old habit of dropping belladonna into their eyes, chasing the exact same doomed dreams pursued by women in centuries long before them. The advertisements of the day promised radiance, clarity, and an almost ethereal glow, and they conveniently left out the small detail that the key active ingredient was slowly, steadily killing the person applying it. It's the same tragic bargain scene throughout tonight's entire journey, simply dressed up now in polite Victorian packaging and sold with a warm, reassuring smile. The arsenic complexion products represent perhaps the most jaw-dropping detail in this whole chapter of the story. Wafers and tonics were marketed directly to women as a way to clear the skin, banish stubborn blemishes, and produce that coveted pale, luminous look. And crucially, they were meant to be swallowed, not applied topically. The underlying idea was that ingesting small amounts of arsenic would give the skin a translucent, delicate quality, and the advertising of the period leaned heavily into confident promises of flawless, radiant beauty. People genuinely, deliberately ingested a notoriously deadly poison on purpose, repeatedly, over extended periods, purely in pursuit of a better complexion. There is a grim internal logic to it, since arsenic in genuinely small doses can measurably affect skin tone and circulation, but the entire practice sat perilously close to slow, deliberate self-poisoning, and the manufacturers selling these products were generally quite happy to look the other way. Arsenic didn't stop at wafers and tonics either. It turned up across an unsettling range of everyday Victorian products, from cosmetics to the vivid green dyes used to color fashionable dresses, wallpapers, and artificial flowers throughout the home. A Victorian woman might poison herself not only through her deliberate beauty routine, but through the very clothes she wore and the room she lived in day after day, surrounded by a fashionable shade of green that was quietly, invisibly toxic the entire time. The Victorian world was genuinely laced with arsenic in ways its own inhabitants only partially understood, and the broader pursuit of beauty and fashionable style put people in repeated, cumulative contact with it across nearly every part of daily life. Looking lovely and staying genuinely healthy were once again not entirely compatible goals during this era. The old faithful poison stuck stubbornly around as well. Lead-based preparations still regularly appeared in skin whiteners and general cosmetics, promising that same pale, smooth finish that never seemed to go out of fashion, while Belladonna retained its established place as the go-to eye-brightening trick for anyone willing to risk permanent vision damage for a slightly wider, more dramatic gaze. Face powders and creams of genuinely uncertain composition were applied confidently in the name of achieving that respectable, natural-looking glow, sometimes carrying the exact same hazards their own grandmothers had unknowingly faced decades earlier. For all this era's public talk of health, purity, and moral virtue, the actual contents of the average beauty cabinet remained a genuine chemical minefield, hiding real, tangible danger behind wholesome-sounding claims and attractively designed labels. What makes this particular chapter especially striking is the sheer gap between public image and private reality. Here was a society that publicly, loudly condemned visible makeup as fundamentally immoral and deceitful, yet privately tolerated women quietly, routinely eating arsenic and dabbing on lead-based products purely for the sake of appearance. The pale, delicate, almost ethereal complexion so widely admired as the Victorian ideal was, in some documented cases, quite literally the visible glow of active, ongoing poisoning. A fragile beauty that came at a genuine, sometimes devastating cost to health and even life itself. The relentless social pressure to appear effortlessly pure and natural drove people steadily toward hidden, genuinely hazardous shortcuts, and the surrounding public shame around cosmetics did absolutely nothing to reduce the underlying danger. If anything, it likely pushed the whole practice further out of open sight and further from any real scrutiny. Suffering for beauty, it turns out, had simply changed its outward costume once again. By this point in tonight's journey, the pattern should feel genuinely unmistakable and almost darkly comic in its stubborn repetition. Civilization after civilization, reaching again and again for the very same small handful of toxic helpers, each one entirely convinced it somehow knows better than every civilization that came immediately before it. Lead, mercury, arsenic, belladonna. The guest list at this particular poison beauty party has barely changed across literally thousands of years. But genuine, lasting change was finally approaching on the horizon, driven not primarily by newfound wisdom, but by industry, emerging science, and a rapidly growing public appetite for beauty products made and sold openly, rather than whispered about behind closed doors. The birth of the beauty business. As the century finally turns, something quietly revolutionary begins to happen. Beauty products start leaving the secret drawing room behind entirely, stepping confidently out into the open, sold openly in shops, printed catalogs, and gleaming new department store counters. What was once homemade, carefully hidden, or outright shameful slowly transforms into a legitimate, respectable commercial industry, complete with recognizable brands, attractive packaging, and confident advertising, all promising to make the buyer more lovely, for a reasonable price. The old moral panic surrounding visible makeup gradually begins to soften, and buying a small pot of cream or a stick of color is no longer considered quite so scandalous. You are, in effect, watching the real-time birth of the modern beauty business, the vast commercial machine that will eventually lead, many decades later, all the way to a brightly lit modern beauty aisle. The great underlying shift here was from homemade to store-bought. For most of the long history covered tonight, beauty preparations had been mixed carefully at home from shared family recipes, or purchased discreetly from local sellers. An informal, often genuinely secretive affair conducted quietly between neighbors. Now, growing commercial companies began manufacturing cosmetics and skincare products on a genuinely larger industrial scale, packaging them attractively in branded jars, tins, and bottles, and selling them openly through proper shops and mail-order catalogs. A woman could now simply open a printed catalog, browse a genuine array of creams, powders, and tonics at her leisure, and order beauty products delivered straight to her own front door. Buying one's appearance was steadily becoming ordinary, well-organized, and increasingly respectable, the lingering shame of previous decades gradually loosening its firm grip on public opinion. Advertising powered much of this broader transformation, and it learned remarkably quickly how to effectively sell an aspirational dream. Print advertisements began filling newspapers and popular magazines with confident promises of clearer skin, softer hands, brighter eyes, and lasting youthful beauty, pairing these products with genuinely glamorous images and bold, confident claims. This represented the emerging machinery of consumer desire being carefully assembled for the first time. An entire industry discovering that it could not merely manufacture physical products, but could actively manufacture the underlying longing for them as well. These advertisements tapped skillfully into both hopes and hidden insecurities alike, suggesting persuasively that the right cream or the right powder could genuinely transform a woman's appearance, her social prospects, even her broader life circumstances. If you've ever felt a modern advertisement quietly convince you that you needed something you had previously lived quite happily without, you're experiencing a persuasive force first perfected during precisely this era. Early beauty brands and ambitious entrepreneurs began laying down the genuine foundations of the modern beauty world we recognize today. Determined founders, some of whom would eventually grow into genuine household names, launched entire companies devoted specifically to skincare and cosmetics, effectively professionalizing what had previously been a scattered, informal cottage craft. They developed signature-branded products, opened dedicated retail counters, and carefully cultivated loyal, returning customers, transforming beauty into a serious commercial enterprise backed by real money and genuine sustained growth. The broader idea that beauty represented a legitimate industry, complete with trusted brands and dedicated salons, took firm root during this period. What had previously lived quietly in whispered recipes and hidden dresser drawers was now stepping confidently out onto the open shop floor for the very first time. Public attitudes shifted steadily alongside all this new commerce. As products became genuinely mass-produced, clearly branded, and openly advertised, the old Victorian horror surrounding visible cosmetics gradually eased considerably. Using beauty products was steadily becoming a normal, even genuinely aspirational part of a modern woman's daily life, rather than remaining a carefully guarded shameful secret, and the surrounding moral heat around the practice noticeably cooled over time. This transformation certainly didn't happen overnight, and plenty of lingering disapproval remained in certain circles, but the overall direction of change was now unmistakably clear. Beauty was steadily moving out of the shadows and firmly into open daylight, from something quietly denied to something proudly, openly purchased. The stage was now fully set for an explosion of open, thoroughly unapologetic glamour. So the turn of the century marks the true, genuine birth of the beauty business as you would likely recognize it today. An entire world of brands, retail counters, printed catalogs, and confident advertising, all built around that same age-old human wish to look one's very best. It transformed beauty from a private, hidden pursuit into a fully public, commercial one, laying down the essential groundwork for absolutely everything that would follow. The secretive era of homemade concoctions was steadily giving way to open shopping, genuine consumer choice, and marketing conducted on a truly grand new scale. And it would take one entirely new, genuinely dazzling industry, built on light and shadow and larger-than-life faces, to teach the whole wider world exactly how it now wanted to look. The silver screen revolution. Then the movies arrive, and everything about beauty changes forever. Under the harsh, unforgiving lights of early Hollywood film sets, ordinary cosmetics simply won't do the job required of them. So an entirely new kind of specialized artistry is born, one dedicated purely to making faces appear perfect on the flickering silver screen. The very word makeup itself enters everyday common speech during this period, and the specialized products originally developed for film stars quickly trickle down into everyday use for ordinary women everywhere. Suddenly, women across the country want the exact lips, the precise brows, and the luminous glow of the actresses they've come to admire on screen. Beauty is no longer dictated primarily by queens and royal courts. It is now set by the flickering, larger-than-life faces projected onto a screen, and an entire nation begins eagerly trying to copy them. The genuine technical challenge posed by early film drove real, meaningful innovation in cosmetics. Early motion picture lighting and the film stock available at the time were remarkably unforgiving, washing out ordinary cosmetics entirely and making faces appear strange, unnaturally pale, or blotchy once captured on camera. A pioneering cosmetics expert who worked closely alongside the major film studios developed products specifically engineered to look flawless under those brutal studio lights. Most famously, this included a smooth, buildable makeup formula that gave actors an even, natural-looking complexion when captured on film. This represented makeup genuinely engineered for performance, tested rigorously on the biggest faces in the entire world, and it worked so remarkably well that ordinary women soon began clamoring for access to the very same products. Hollywood quickly became, without much competition, the single most powerful beauty influence the world had ever seen up to that point. Millions of ordinary people sat together in darkened movie theaters, gazing up at glamorous film stars whose every feature was magnified and carefully idealized, and they went home afterward genuinely wanting to look just like them. The bold lips, the precisely defined brows, and the luminous skin of these screen goddesses became widely copied templates that women everywhere attempted to recreate at home. Fan magazines and product advertisements spread these specific styles and their associated products rapidly, promising eager readers that they, too, could achieve a genuine movie star look with the right purchase. Beauty ideals were now effectively broadcast on a massive, unprecedented scale, radiating outward from the film capital to shape faces across entire continents simultaneously. This particular era also helped complete the broader public rehabilitation of makeup itself as a concept. Where the Victorians had thoroughly shamed visible cosmetics as morally suspect, the genuine glamour of Hollywood made them aspirational and exciting instead, tying makeup directly to fame, romance, and modern sophistication. Wearing visible makeup was no longer treated as a scandalous secret, but was now embraced as a glamorous, confident personal choice, something a stylish, fashionable, up-to-date woman did openly and with genuine pride. The products themselves became considerably more sophisticated and specialized during this period too, with distinct dedicated items now available for the eyes, cheeks, lips, and overall complexion, sold in genuinely attractive packaging, and backed by the irresistible allure of association with major film stars. The full modern makeup kit was steadily taking recognizable shape, and importantly, it now carried none of the old inherited shame. The overall influence flowed in one clear, powerful direction, from screen to store to street. A particular look debuted by a beloved, popular actress could sweep across the entire country within weeks, sending eager women directly to the cosmetics counter to purchase the exact shade or style they had recently seen in the latest film release. Beauty companies deliberately tied their products directly to Hollywood glamour, and the now familiar machinery of celebrity endorsement so recognizable today clicked firmly, permanently into place during this era. The face that had dazzled audiences in a darkened theater on a Friday evening became the face millions of ordinary women attempted to recreate for themselves the very next Saturday morning. A clear, repeating pattern of aspiration and imitation had been established that has genuinely never really stopped since. So the rise of cinema gave the world of beauty its most influential new master, the silver screen itself, and gave the wider world a modern, thoroughly professionalized art of makeup application, along with newfound confidence to wear it proudly and openly. It firmly established the enduring pattern of film stars setting broad trends, with everyone else eagerly following, of products carefully engineered for visual perfection and marketed skillfully through glamour and fame. From this particular point forward, beauty would move forever at the speed of mass media, shifting constantly with each new emerging star and each passing decade. And the very first of these thoroughly modern decades was about to arrive with a genuine bang, tossing out many of the old established rules and boldly painting on an entirely new, rebellious face. The Roaring Twenties, beauty becomes rebellion. The 1920s kicked the door down entirely and refused to apologize for it afterward. After generations of women carefully pretending to wear absolutely nothing on their faces, the flapper of this new decade wears her makeup loud, proud, and completely unmistakable. Dark, deliberately smudged, heavily kohl-rimmed eyes, bold, small Cupid's bow lips, and cheeks touched with a defiant, visible flush become the defining look of an entire generation determined, above all else, to have genuine fun. Cake mascara, carefully applied using a tiny dedicated brush and considerable patience, finally makes dramatic, darkened lashes genuinely achievable for the everyday woman, not just the wealthy elite. Wearing obviously visible makeup transformed almost overnight from a shameful secret into a bold, deliberate statement of personal freedom. For the first time in a very long while, being visibly seen wearing your makeup was entirely, unapologetically the point. This represented a genuine beauty revolution wrapped tightly around a broader social one happening simultaneously. The young women of the 1920s, the flappers, embraced a bold new sense of personal freedom, cutting their hair dramatically short, shortening their skirts considerably, dancing energetically to wild new musical styles, and openly rejecting the restraint so carefully maintained by their own mothers and grandmothers. Visible makeup became a genuine badge of this broader rebellion, a deliberate, defiant public announcement that a woman could paint her own face and genuinely enjoy herself without needing to apologize to anyone for it. What had remained carefully hidden and firmly denied for decades was now openly flaunted in full public view, representing a small but meaningful daily act of personal independence. The human face itself became a canvas for an entirely new cultural attitude, and that attitude was unmistakably, confidently modern. The eyes provided the real visual drama of the 1920s, dark, smoky, and genuinely intense. Women rimmed their eyes generously with kohl and dark eyeshadow, deliberately smudging the color for that sultry, heavy-lidded look, partly inspired by exotic film fashions popular during the period. Lashes were darkened and carefully defined using cake mascara, a hardened block of pigment that had to be dampened first, then worked carefully onto a small brush, before being painstakingly stroked onto individual lashes. This was a genuinely fiddly process demanding real patience and steady hands. There were certainly no quick, convenient swipes from a modern tube available here, just careful, deliberate effort performed patiently in front of a mirror. The eventual reward was that dramatic, clearly defined gaze that became an unmistakable visual signature of the entire era, genuinely worth all the accompanying fuss and effort. The lips completed this bold new look with an equally distinctive shape. The prevailing fashion called for small, sharply defined lips painted deliberately into a pronounced Cupid's bow. That small pouting peak at the very center of the upper lip that gave the entire mouth a delicate, deliberately exaggerated shape. Rather than following a woman's natural lip line faithfully, women often painted their lips noticeably smaller and rounder than nature had provided, creating the distinctive bee-sting effect so closely associated with this particular decade. Deep reds and other dark shades proved especially popular, standing boldly against the pale, powdered skin favored throughout the era. Combined with those smoky, dramatic eyes, the overall resulting look featured strong visual contrasts and confident, saturated color. Glamorous, thoroughly modern, and genuinely impossible to mistake for the deliberately natural look so favored in earlier decades. The available products and tools of this particular era were rapidly catching up with the growing ambition of the wearers. Lipsticks housed in convenient twist-up metal tubes made bold lip color considerably easier to apply and to carry along throughout the day, letting a woman touch up her look confidently, wherever she happened to be. This represented a small but genuinely liberating innovation in daily practicality. Compacts equipped with small mirrors and pressed powder let women tend openly to their appearance in public settings, entirely unashamed, and the rapidly growing beauty industry rushed eagerly to supply this rising demand with an ever-expanding range of available cosmetic products. Makeup was steadily becoming portable, easily purchasable, and proudly public, a normal part of a woman's everyday equipment, rather than remaining a carefully hidden private ritual. The essential infrastructure of modern beauty was clicking firmly into place, right alongside this bold, unapologetic new face. The 1920s marked the precise moment beauty finally threw off the last remaining traces of inherited shame and stepped fully, confidently into the modern age, loud, confident, and openly worn for all to see. It fused makeup directly together with personal freedom and self-expression, transforming a painted face into a genuine statement about who a woman was and precisely how she intended to live her own life. The overall look was dramatic, the underlying attitude was defiant, and the whole approach effectively set the template for the fast-moving, trend-driven decades still to come, each with its own distinct signature look. But the youthful exuberance of the 1920s would soon give way to something considerably more polished and glamorous, as harder economic times arrived, and beauty once again turned to the dreamlike perfection of the silver screen for genuine comfort and welcome escape. The 1930s sculpted sophistication. The 1930s smoothed all that youthful, rebellious energy of the previous decade into something considerably sleeker and more sophisticated. The reigning look of this new era is pure movie star glamour: thin, elegantly arched eyebrows, often plucked away almost entirely and then carefully redrawn, softly defined eyes, and a graceful, refined mouth. Women across the country study their favorite screen goddesses closely, carefully recreating those exact looks at home, guided by a growing flood of glossy magazines and detailed advertisements. Beauty becomes aspirational in an entirely new way during this decade, tied directly and deliberately to fame, romance, and the shimmering fantasy world of cinema. You're no longer simply getting ready for the day. You're trying, ever so slightly, to become a star yourself. The broader mood of the decade shaped this particular look considerably. These were genuinely hard years for a great many people, shadowed heavily by widespread economic struggle, and the bold, boyish exuberance so characteristic of the 1920s gradually softened into something more elegant, feminine, and quietly dreamlike. The movies offered a glittering, welcome escape from difficult daily circumstances, and their glamorous stars steadily became the beauty ideals that everyone longed to emulate in their own lives. The defining face of the 1930s was refined and polished, all smooth sophistication, rather than youthful rebellion, projecting an image of grace and allure that seemed to promise a more beautiful world, just barely out of everyday reach. In genuinely tough economic times, that shimmering fantasy of glamour offered real comfort, and women reached for it consistently through their own daily beauty routines. The eyebrows became the truly unforgettable signature feature of this era, and they were dramatic indeed. Prevailing fashion called for very thin, elegantly arched eyebrows, and to achieve precisely the desired shape, many women plucked their entire natural eyebrows away almost completely, then carefully redrew new ones using a fine pencil in a delicate, curved line. This approach gave women complete control over the final shape, but demanded genuine ongoing commitment, and the results ranged considerably from strikingly elegant to permanently, faintly surprised in appearance. It's a look that has swung reliably in and out of fashion across many subsequent decades, and the 1930s embraced its most extreme version with genuine enthusiasm. Once again, the humble eyebrow proved itself to be perhaps the single most volatile feature in the entire history of beauty covered tonight. The eyes and lips followed this same refined, glamorous underlying logic. Eyes were softly shaded and carefully defined, often finished with a subtle, sophisticated hint of smokiness. Lashes were darkened to help frame a dreamy, alluring gaze, perfectly suited for an intimate camera close-up. Lips were painted in considerably more graceful, fuller shapes than the tiny bee-stung mouths favored during the previous decade, rendered in rich, romantic shades that photographed beautifully both on screen and off. The overall resulting effect was smooth, elegant, and genuinely mature, a face built around polished glamour rather than playful youthful rebellion, with every single element aimed directly at that idealized silver screen loveliness. The face, in short, of a woman who seemed to genuinely belong under a spotlight. The established pathway from movie screen to everyday face grew even stronger and considerably more organized during this decade. Beauty magazines, dedicated fan publications, and product advertisements offered detailed, practical guidance for recreating the specific styles of individual named stars, complete with helpful tips, techniques, and specific product recommendations. Cosmetics companies tied their products ever more tightly and deliberately to Hollywood glamour, and this growing culture of published beauty advice effectively taught an entire generation of ordinary women exactly how to shape their brows, shade their eyes, and paint their lips like the celebrated actresses they personally admired. Beauty was steadily becoming a genuine skill to be studied and carefully practiced, an art form complete with detailed instructions, and the film stars themselves served as both the teachers and the ultimate aspirational goal. The dream was being effectively democratized, one printed magazine tutorial at a time. The 1930s gave the broader world of beauty its lasting template of aspirational, media-driven glamour, refined and elegant, carefully learned from the screen and diligently practiced at home. It firmly cemented the enduring pattern of film stars serving as beauty icons and popular magazines functioning as informal beauty schools, teaching an entire generation to sculpt their own faces toward an idealized cinematic loveliness. It represented sophistication used deliberately as escape, a shimmering polish laid carefully over genuinely difficult economic times. But those difficult times were about to turn considerably darker and more urgent still, and beauty, remarkably enough, would soon be called upon to serve a purpose considerably larger than mere glamour, becoming a small but genuinely meaningful act of quiet resilience in a world now consumed entirely by war. World War II, lipstick as an act of defiance. Then the world goes to war, and beauty itself is effectively drafted into active service. With raw materials growing scarce and silk stockings becoming nearly impossible to find anywhere, women improvise with genuine ingenuity, painting their bare legs with specially tinted lotion, and even carefully drawing a thin line up the back to convincingly mimic a proper stocking seam. Bold red lipstick becomes almost a patriotic symbol during this period, a small daily act of personal morale and quiet defiance during genuinely grim times. Governments and cosmetics companies alike began actively framing looking put together as a genuine civic duty, a meaningful way of keeping public spirits high on the home front. This represents beauty functioning as resilience, as resourcefulness, and as a form of quiet rebellion, all achieved through steady hands and a truly remarkable amount of make-do ingenuity. Wartime shortages defined this entire era and demanded genuine creativity from ordinary women. Raw materials that had previously gone into cosmetics and clothing production were now urgently needed for the broader war effort. So many familiar beauty products became scarce, tightly rationed, or simply unavailable altogether. Silk and nylon stockings became a particular casualty of the war, as the fabrics used to manufacture them were diverted entirely to military use, leaving ordinary women without the sheer, seamed hosiery that had become a standard, expected part of a proper outfit. Rather than simply go without the look entirely, women got genuinely inventive, applying specially tinted lotions or dedicated leg makeup directly to their bare skin to convincingly mimic the color and appearance of stockings. Some women carefully drew a thin line up the back of each leg to imitate the traditional seam, representing a small but genuine triumph of resourceful ingenuity over wartime scarcity. That painted-on stocking seam serves as a perfect emblem of wartime beauty more broadly, resourceful, determined, and just slightly defiant in spirit. Getting that line straight and perfectly even down the back of one's own leg was no easy task at all, requiring a genuinely steady hand, a sharp eye, and quite often the direct help of a friend to check the finished result. Women went to genuinely real trouble to maintain their everyday appearance under difficult, constrained wartime conditions, refusing to let hardship strip away every last ordinary pleasure and small measure of personal dignity. It represented a meaningful way of holding onto some sense of normalcy and self-respect when so much else around them remained genuinely uncertain. A quiet, persistent insistence that life, and looking recognizably like oneself, would continue on despite absolutely everything happening in the wider world. Red lipstick specifically took on a meaning that extended far beyond simple glamour during this period. Bold red lips became a genuine symbol of morale, resilience, and even outright patriotism. A small, deliberate act of confidence and cheerfulness during genuinely dark days for the entire nation. The prevailing idea took firm hold that keeping up one's personal appearance was genuinely good for morale, both on a personal level and a broader national one. A way of signaling that the home front remained strong, determined, and fundamentally unbroken despite the ongoing crisis. Looking properly well-groomed was actively framed during this period as a genuine kind of civic duty, a meaningful personal contribution to the collective national mood, and red lipstick in particular became almost a recognized badge of quiet determination. There is genuine power in the idea that simply painting one's lips could function as a small act of courage, and in those particular years, it genuinely, meaningfully did. This era also saw women stepping confidently into entirely new social and professional roles, as they took on demanding work and serious responsibilities in truly unprecedented numbers, and the broader beauty culture of the time adapted right alongside them. The prevailing public messaging actively encouraged women to remain strong, capable, and well-presented, all simultaneously blending genuine practicality with the ongoing maintenance of public morale. Makeup that was quick to apply, genuinely durable, and easy to use suited lives that had become considerably busier and more demanding than ever before. The broader beauty industry pitched its available products directly as helpful aids for keeping up one's appearance through long, genuinely hardworking days. Beauty itself was being actively woven into a much larger cultural story of endurance and meaningful contribution. No longer simply glamour for its own sake, but a small, genuine part of getting through an extraordinarily difficult collective moment. Wartime beauty stands today as a genuine testament to human resourcefulness and the stubborn, persistent refusal to let hardship win entirely. It gave the world painted-on stocking legs, patriotic red lips, and the powerful underlying idea that keeping up one's appearance could function as a genuine act of resilience and collective morale, rather than mere empty vanity. It showed beauty at both its most practical and its most genuinely meaningful, a real source of personal dignity and quiet defiance during truly trying times. And when those difficult years finally, mercifully ended, a weary world proved genuinely ready to celebrate, ushering in an entirely new age of renewed abundance, polished glamour, and beauty routines considerably more elaborate and widely embraced than anything that had come before. The 1950s, polished perfection. Peace finally returns, and beauty explodes outward into glorious color and genuine contradiction. The 1950s bring with them an age of polished, glamorous perfection, bold red lips, perfectly matched nails, dramatically winged eyes, and an entire booming industry eager to tell every single woman exactly how to properly achieve them. With prosperity steadily returning and consumer culture booming across the country, beauty becomes considerably more elaborate, more widely embraced, and more commercially driven than it had ever been before. The prevailing ideal was put together perfection, immaculate hair, a flawless complexion, softly defined eyes finished with a graceful flick of liner, and a bold, confident red or pink lip, often carefully matched to freshly painted nails. Beauty companies flourished during this decade, advertising heavily and confidently promising women all the tools necessary to achieve that groomed, thoroughly feminine ideal. It was a coordinated, genuinely high-maintenance look, and the rapidly growing industry stood eagerly ready to sell every product, tip, and technique required to properly pull it off. That polished perfection carried with it a distinct whiff of underlying social pressure, tied up closely with the era's broader ideals surrounding the well-kept, properly presented woman. Looking one's absolute best was presented, almost as a genuine social expectation, as simply part of being a proper, admirable modern woman, and contemporary advertising leaned skillfully into both aspiration and a kind of gentle, persistent insecurity. Magazines and cosmetics companies alike offered endless practical guidance on achieving and carefully maintaining that flawless look, covering everything from proper complexion care to the perfectly applied lip. It was glamorous and genuinely desirable, but it was also demanding, a standard that required real time, real money, and real sustained effort to properly uphold. The 1950s face was undeniably beautiful, and it never came easily or cheaply. The 1960s, youth overturns everything. Then the 1960s arrived and cheerfully overturned this entire established arrangement. A genuine youthful cultural revolution swept steadily through both fashion and beauty during this decade, and the polished, mature perfection so celebrated throughout the 1950s suddenly felt distinctly old-fashioned and out of step. The new prevailing ideal was young, fresh, and genuinely daring, and the visual drama shifted decisively away from the lips and toward the eyes instead. Bold, graphic eyeliner, pale or entirely nude-toned lips, and above all else, lashes, dramatic lashes, and then even more lashes came to define the fashionable mod look of the decade, with heavy mascara and false eyelashes together creating wide, doll-like, almost startled-looking eyes. Some women even painted tiny individual lines beneath the eye to convincingly mimic additional lower lashes. The human face was being deliberately reinvented around one single, dominant feature, a big, wide-eyed gaze, and it belonged unmistakably to the young. The broader influences and beauty icons shaping this look changed considerably as well, reflecting a wider world now moving at genuinely rapid speed. Fashionable young models and emerging pop culture figures steadily replaced the polished silver screen stars of previous decades as the primary beauty leaders of the moment, and the overall look grew considerably bolder, more playful, and more genuinely experimental. Pale lips deliberately paired with dramatic eyes, striking geometric styling choices, and an overall spirit of fun and youthful rebellion marked this era's beauty as distinctly, unmistakably modern. Beauty was no longer primarily about achieving mature, carefully coordinated perfection, but had shifted instead towards self-expression, genuine novelty, and a clear sense of belonging to an exciting, vibrant new generation. The old established rules existed now, it seemed, purely to be broken, and breaking them enthusiastically was very much the entire delightful point. Together, the 1950s and 1960s revealed just how quickly, and how dramatically, beauty standards could genuinely swing within the span of a single generation. Moving from immaculate, red-lipped glamour all the way to pale-lipped, lash-heavy youthful rebellion, these 2 consecutive decades firmly cemented the now familiar modern pattern of beauty functioning as a fast-moving, ever-changing parade of trends. Each successive decade deliberately defining itself in direct opposition to the one immediately before it, driven forward by youth culture, mass media, and an increasingly booming commercial industry. Beauty had become genuinely dynamic, expressive, and seemingly endlessly renewable, capable of reinventing itself again and again with each passing generation. And this restless pattern of reinvention would only continue accelerating in the decades still to come, carrying beauty forward through disco shimmer, bold 1980s excess, and stripped-back 1990s cool, all the way to the vast, brightly lit, endlessly stocked beauty world you recognize today. From disco to the digital age. And so we arrive, finally, in the world you actually recognize as your own. From the warm shimmer and glitter of the disco years, through the bold, unapologetic excess of the 1980s, and on to the stripped-back, matte minimalist cool that defined the 1990s, beauty kept right on reinventing itself, faster and faster with each passing decade. Then, eventually, the modern beauty aisle arrives, vast, glowing temples stocked with every conceivable serum, shade, and specialized tool imaginable, waiting patiently under bright overhead lights, with a detailed video tutorial for absolutely every single one of them waiting conveniently in your own pocket. The 1970s brought warmth, shimmer, and a considerably looser, freer overall spirit. Disco-era glamour meant glowing, bronzed skin, shimmering iridescent eyeshadows in golds and earthy tones, glossy lips, and a general pervasive air of sparkle and effortless ease, while a parallel competing natural movement simultaneously favored a softer, more relaxed everyday look. It was, in many ways, a decade defined by both glitter and genuine understatement, sometimes appearing together at the very same party. Then the 1980s arrived and turned every available dial firmly up to maximum. Bold, bright, and thoroughly unafraid of excess, the 1980s gave the world vivid blue and hot pink eyeshadows. Heavy blush swept dramatically and generously across the cheeks, strong, boldly colored lips, and big hair to match every other big element of the look. Subtlety was decidedly not the goal here. Visual impact was. The 1990s then swung hard in the entirely opposite direction, exactly as fashion always eventually does. Reacting directly against 1980s excess, this new decade embraced a stripped-back, thoroughly understated sense of cool, matte skin, muted brownish lip shades, thin, carefully groomed eyebrows, and a general pervasive air of effortless, slightly aloof minimalism. The supermodels who defined this era established a clear ideal of polished, yet genuinely pared-down beauty, while emerging grunge culture simultaneously pushed an even more casual, deliberately undone look. The pendulum had swung from maximum color to minimum fuss within the span of a single decade. Beauty proved once again, as it has throughout this entire journey, that it functions as a pendulum that genuinely never stops swinging, each new generation firmly defining itself against whatever look its own elders happen to wear. Underneath all these rapidly shifting surface looks, the broader industry itself was quietly transforming into the commercial colossus you recognize so well today. Beauty retailing was fundamentally reinvented around the concept of vast, open-format stores, where ordinary customers could freely browse, sample, and explore an enormous range of competing brands and products entirely on their own, rather than being served exclusively from behind a formal counter. Suddenly, the whole dazzling world of cosmetics was laid out openly under bright lights, ready to be touched, tested, and freely chosen at will, an experience that effectively transformed simple beauty shopping into a genuine event in its own right. The modern beauty superstore, with its endless aisles and glittering sense of abundance, became a genuine destination unto itself, and the sheer scale of available choice would have genuinely stunned every single generation that came before it. Then finally, technology handed the entire beauty world its most powerful engine yet. The rise of the internet, and especially of video and social media platforms, meant that literally anyone could now learn techniques once known only to trained professionals, simply by watching detailed tutorials made freely available whenever they liked. Ordinary, everyday people became genuine beauty influencers commanding vast audiences of their own. Trends now spread rapidly across the entire globe within mere days, rather than requiring decades as they once had, and a genuinely staggering range of products, shades, and specialized formulations flooded the consumer market. The old, top-down world, where queens, then film stars, then professional models had each dictated the prevailing look in turn, gave way to something considerably more sprawling, democratic, and fast-moving. Now, new trends could emerge from genuinely anywhere, and everyone suddenly had a front-row seat, along with a mirror of their very own. Which brings us, at last, right back to exactly where you find yourself tonight, surrounded by more accumulated beauty knowledge and more available products than any single human being throughout all of history could ever hope to fully use. The thread that never breaks. Think now of the entire long road stretching out behind you tonight. The ochre and animal grease, the kohl and the rice powder, the lead, the mercury, the arsenic, the towering powdered wigs, the carefully painted legs, the pale lips, and the bold red ones. All of it leading, eventually, right here to a glowing store aisle and a screen resting quietly in your hand. Human beings have been decorating their own faces since long before the very first city was ever built, chasing beauty through poison, through genuine pain, and through sheer, ridiculous, stubborn devotion. And through it all, across every single culture and every century we've walked through together tonight, they have never once actually stopped. The available tools have transformed almost beyond recognition. The underlying human impulse has not changed at all. So there it is, the long, strange, endlessly determined story of the human beauty routine, laid out from that very first smear of red clay all the way to the glowing aisles of today. What a journey it has genuinely been. You lined your eyes with ground stone on the banks of the Nile. You painted your face with lead in a Roman mourning ritual. You plucked your own hairline back, one painful strand at a time. You dripped poison into your own eyes in pursuit of a dreamier gaze. You hid behind a slowly cracking white mask in an Elizabethan royal court, and you carefully drew a single straight line up the back of a bare leg, on a day when there were simply no stockings left anywhere to be found. And through every single moment of it, from the towering powdered wigs of Versailles to the secretive Victorian pinch of a cheek, people kept reaching, again and again, for that exact same simple thing, The quiet wish to feel just a little more lovely, a little more genuinely themselves, a little more ready to face whatever the world had waiting for them that day. It's easy to laugh at all the poisons and the plucking and the sheer ridiculous devotion running through this entire story. And honestly, you probably should, because so much of it is genuinely, wonderfully funny in hindsight. But there is something quietly tender woven through it as well. Behind every strange, long-forgotten fashion was a real person, looking into a polished piece of bronze or a foggy scrap of glass, simply hopping to like what they saw looking back. They endured real discomfort, and sometimes genuine danger, for that small hope. And their stubborn, hopeful vanity is quietly stitched into every single product sitting on your own shelf tonight. So as you drift off now, surrounded by gentle modern cleansers, genuinely safe ingredients, and a mirror that shows you back clearly and honestly, spare a soft, quiet thought for all of them. The painted, the powdered, the poisoned, and the endlessly resourceful faces of the past. They chased beauty across countless centuries, through every civilization we've visited together tonight, so that you could simply rest now, easily and well. Sleep well, you look just fine exactly as you are.